Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and we're here again with another 2-hour compilation. If you're listening alone, that's good. If you're listening with headphones, that is even better. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
What's a creepy encounter you'll never forget? I was playing outside of my grandmother's house and heard the biggest male voice calling my name. I say big voice because I felt the call as much as I heard it. Peepaw was long gone and dead, and she almost never had men over, so I went inside to see if it was one of my uncles. Nanny was sitting on the couch watching her stories, aka soap operas. No uncles, just her. I went back outside, only to find a pack of coyotes in the same spot I was playing in, rural Tennessee. This spooked me something fierce. Still does. When I worked in a hotel, I was outside just before starting work and talking with a coworker while she had a smoke. Some guy was walking down the street towards us with a 2x4 in his hand. We didn't notice him until he was quite close, and he screamed something about his dead family. He then stormed right up to us and swung the 2x4 to hit my coworker in the head, and I just reacted, stepped between them, and raised my arm to take the blow, and he didn't go through with it for whatever reason. He held it ready to swing for a moment, and then stormed off and threw the 2x4 in a garbage can. I went and picked it up just in case he came back, and that's when I realized it had a bunch of nails sticking out of it. Went camping alone one time, first mistake, to a place that I regularly would go to. Told my family where I was going and how long I was going to be there, so I took the obvious precautions. The idea was that I would hike to a certain lake I had been to several times before and set up camp next to it. I set out fairly late in the afternoon and got to my predetermined campsite at about 8 in the evening. Sun was still out as it was summertime, but it was definitely beginning to set. I set up my tent, got a fire going, cooked, and ate my dinner. As it got later, about midnight, I set out a couple 100 yards away with my hatchet to a dead tree to get some more wood for my fire. When I finished, I turned off my headlamp and walked back to my campsite by the light of the moon, only to find that there was a person standing on the outskirts of my campsite opposite the side I had come in. I was a ways away, and he hadn't spotted me, so I crouched down behind a bush and just watched what he did. I could only see him by the light of my fire and the moon, but he was very clearly acting as if he was looking for me, and was confused as to why I was not there. I seriously just waited for him to leave, which he did pretty quickly. I was so scared at this point and had no idea what to do, as I was worried he was going to jump me if I tried to go and pack my stuff. I decided to just grab my pack and leave my tent and sleeping gear and get the hell out of there. I half walked, half ran to my car 4 miles away at the trailhead, all the while wondering if I was being watched through the woods. Didn't dare turn on my headlamp, so I had to get back to my car by the light of the moon, trying to stay along the trail. Made it safely, thankfully, but it was the longest, most panic-stricken couple of hours of my life. Never found out who the guy was, and never stuck around to find out. Worst night of my life. I already posted, but I thought of another one. Not long ago, I was babysitting my best friend's young baby. She and her husband went out for Valentine's Day. Not even an hour into babysitting, there's a knock at her door. I opened the door because they know a lot of people in their neighborhood, and I figured it was a neighbor or friend. This guy looks surprised to see me, and I ask him why he's there. He said he delivered stuff for them a few days before, and he may have some missing items that they ordered, and can I call my friend to ask? So I shut the door, locked it, and called my friend. She answers and says, "Oh my god, that guy hit on me the other day and won't leave me alone." She went on to say that he asked for her number in the delivery app after dropping off her delivery. She didn't answer him. Sometime after that, he literally came back to ask her out at her door. She obviously said no, but he must not have gotten the message. After talking to my friend, I went back to the baby. Next thing I see after walking by their windows is him starting into my soul through the living room window. He asked if my friend answered, and I told him that there's nothing missing from her delivery, and he thankfully went away. I don't think he came back after that, and her husband reported him on the delivery app. Extremely creepy. 7th grade math teacher. Dude made grilled cheeses for lunch on Fridays. Made math kind of interesting. Fairly cool dude. Come to find out that he got fired from his previous workplace for behavior that resembled grooming. Apparently, he was doing the same thing with me. Dude also took me off school grounds without notifying anybody, which is dodgy as fuck now that I think about it. And yes, he was eventually fired about midway through the year, so yep, teacher was a creep. This was about 10 years ago. I was home alone and there was a knock on the door. I opened the main door. There is now a screen door between me and the man who knocks. He says, "Hi, I'm doing some work on a house on your street. Can I use your restroom?" Our big dog comes up behind me. The man isn't fazed. "Oh, I see you've got a dog." I tell him that there's a gas station in a very much walkable distance he can use. I don't know if I can make it. The people we're doing work for locked their door. I get it. I know your husband isn't home. I cut him off, said no. Closed, locked, chained the door. Texted my husband. I was supposed to leave shortly to go to class that afternoon. I decided to stay home, locked inside because I was afraid to leave the house. About 10 years ago, I drove to a 7-Eleven with my boyfriend. I stayed in the car and he went inside to grab cigarettes and some drinks. As I sat in the car, I saw this teenage boy walk out the door. He looked at me and we made brief eye contact. His eyes looked completely devoid of anything, just nothingness. My blood ran cold and I felt frozen in place for a moment. The boy continued on walking away while I sat there shaky, just completely unnerved. Just then my boyfriend got into the car and blurted out, "I just had the weirdest fucking thing happen. Did you see that kid who walked out here?" He told me how he had the same exact experience with the boy inside the store. I don't know exactly how to explain how or why we both felt this way when making eye contact with this kid. We still bring it up from time to time. We call him the Soul Snatcher. Weird fucking shit, man. In my freshman year of high school, there was a senior who was in a drama club meeting with me that became obsessed with me for that year until I graduated. I used to go to the library for lunch, and suddenly he started showing up, and then started sitting next to me on the other computer. Then he asked for my number because he wanted help with the science class that I was also in, so I was like, fine. And he sent me anime porn. I told him off, and he just laughed, and then multiple times he looked up anime porn on my computer under my account if I walked away for a second. He always did stuff on the computers, so I thought that if I sat in a different section of the library then he wouldn't follow me. He did. He would sit practically on my lap, and I would scoot away. He would also touch me in areas that weren't appropriate. He groped my boobs on multiple occasions, and one time I was leaning back on a beanbag, and he came over and said that he would rape me and no one would ever see. And I was like, what? And he stuck his hand in between my legs. I was way too nervous to tell him something before because he was a lot bigger, but I decided to not go back to the library after that and texted him to never come near me again. After that, he started to come up behind me and try to steal things out of my backpack and stopped when I turned around and kicked him. Then I started seeing him on my walk home from school and got scared, so I told my oldest brother and he walked home with me. The last time I ever saw him was when he was knocking on my window, and I ran and told my brother, and my brother chased him off. Home in bed, and hear someone open the front door and the unmistakable sound of work boots walking around on the tile floor. Figured it was my dad as it sounded exactly like him. I tell her asking why he's home so early, but no response. Footsteps get closer to the bedroom, which was at the back of the house, and I yell out again asking why he's trying to spook me. They get up to the door. I call out again and nothing. I waited a minute, jumped out of bed scared as hell, and left for the day until my family got home. Called my dad right after I left the house, and he was at work. So a bit of background. I work in a machine shop that's been around for a while, at least late 70s. The building's roughly 50 years old, but is kept in decent shape by maintenance. It must have been 4 months since I started working, and I was told of the incident in 1984. The story goes like this. First shift had a delivery of steel beams coming in that day, and it was a pretty big offload, so there was more guys around than usual. So they're offloading the truck, and one of the steel beams comes free from the crane and traveling very fast went straight through a guy, tore his midsection apart. He obviously died on the spot, right in the overhead doorway in Building 1. This is where my experience come in. Working second shift, pretty late at night. Boss tells me to go to Building 2. We have 2 buildings. Building 1 is main shop, and 2 is more warehouse. So I walk over, and it's flat, dark. Only the security light's on. My idiot self can't find the light switch, so I just pull out my flashlight and get to business, doing odd stuff that usually comes with being on second shift. I work through the building. Then I get to the stock section. No light. Only the faint glow of the emergency exit sign 300 yards on the other side of the void. It is then that I get a sense of being very alone and cut off, and I decide to stop slacking and get my ass to the other building. No matter what I do, however, I can't shake the feeling of unease. As I'm making my way out of the building, I turn around at the door to make a final check. What I saw was unmistakable. It was a man in all black, save a discolored portion of his torso, standing just outside the overhead door to the stock section. The single light overhead seems to drown in his presence, and the exit sign that glowed red cast an eerie shadow. I thought for a second I was being pranked, but I very quickly remembered I was the only person in the building. I noped out of there as fast as I could, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. It was later that week that I learned the exact same thing happened to a guy a few years ago. He came running to Building 1, blubbering about a guy in black. Nobody believed him, but they took notice when I burst through the door to the foreman's shack. Since then, I can see a shadowy figure darting in and out of my field of vision, and sometimes I'll see a dark figure darting out of sight around a corner. I've only ever experienced this in Building 2, however, so I try to stay out as much as possible. When I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I was walking home from school. A brown Oldsmobile stopped next to me, and the driver leaned over and opened the passenger side door, telling me to get in, that my mother sent him to pick me up. I knew not to get into the car and started to walk away. I was walking on the other side of a ditch because this road has no sidewalk, and I knew the neighborhood well enough to run if I needed to, so I wasn't too afraid that I couldn't get away. Not 2 seconds after I started walking, the man switched his tone and became furious, yelling at me to get into the car. I don't remember his face so much, but I do remember he wore a cowboy hat, but this was East Texas in the 90s. As he was yelling at me, a gray SUV pulled up behind him and blew its horn, causing him to peel off without first closing his door. The SUV then pulled up alongside me while I was walking, and a woman, incredibly hysterical, proceeded to scream at me to never get into a car with a person I didn't know, and continued to scream at me while driving alongside me as I walked all the way home. Honestly, between the two of them, I thought I had done something wrong and was too afraid to tell my mother about it when she got home from work. I walked that same route every day to and from school after that and never saw that man or woman again. Well, when I was in 4th grade, there was an attempt in what I would assume would go down as kidnapping me. I was quite chubby at the time, could also be considered fat. One day, I was taking a morning stroll with my parents when they got a bit ahead of me, like 30 to 40 meters ahead. I passed by a bakery which hadn't opened shop yet, and less than a minute later, this guy in his mid-30s came by on his bike and asked if I knew when the bakery was going to open. I said I had no clue. The guy asked if there were any other bakeries nearby, and I told him that I'm not sure, but there was probably another one further down the road. This was a pretty normal conversation, but by the time we got to this point, I felt that he was getting uncomfortably close to me. I jumped over a canal by the side of the road and tried to make sure he couldn't follow me on his bike as expected. He rode away. I didn't see this situation as awfully suspicious at the time, so I kept walking and didn't pick up the pace to reach my parents and tell them what just happened. After like a minute or two, the guy came back, commented on my fat ass, then suggested that I should hop on his bike to help him find the other bakery I told him about. Mind you, he was less than a meter away from me, and there was practically no one else around. This is when I got really nervous and didn't know what to do. When I refused his offer, he tried to grab me around the waist, but I pushed him away. Seeing that he couldn't possibly lift my fat ass and drag me away against my will, he gave up and rode away. For good this time, but that's not the end of it. I actually memorized his plate number and told my parents the whole thing. We reported the incident to police and gave them the plate number, but my dad was pissed. We spent the next week driving around the neighborhood around the same time the guy tried to kidnap me to see if we can find him, and find him we did. One morning, we saw the guy riding his bike in an intersection, so we tailed him and found his workplace, which was relatively close. My dad drove back home and dropped me off. He didn't want me any more involved than I already was, and then drove right back to the police station and took a few officers to the guy's workplace. He was arrested on the spot and taken to court after some time, but we eventually let him go. Can't remember why. I was a kid, so no one would really tell me anything. I was also mugged last month, but I wouldn't classify that as creepy since it actually happened. I was like 12, getting off the bus from school. I noticed a man staring at me and just smiling like the smile was filled with pure terror. I'm paranoid as hell, so I started panicking, and when I went to get up, he was right behind me still. When I got off the bus, I saw he was also getting off and still looking at me, so I legged it across traffic to get away from him. He stopped as soon as I was on the other side, and he walked off. My boyfriend's family just moved into a new house in a new neighborhood, and I was there visiting and helping set up pictures and furniture. It got pretty late, so we took a break and we were sitting in the living room having a couple beers. Next thing we know, a man soaked in blood walks through the front door that was connected to the living room. Everyone was seated on the couch facing away from the door except me and my boyfriend, who were standing facing him. I was frozen in shock while my boyfriend yelled, "Who the fuck are you?" Everyone on the couch jumped up quickly and away from him. The bloody dude just stood there with a blank look on his face. My boyfriend told him to leave, and he turned around and walked out without hesitation. We were pretty shaken up and called the police. They came and took our statement, but nothing ever came of it. We have no clue if they ever found him or not. The scariest part was that he wasn't injured or hurt, and it was obvious the blood didn't come from him. Something I'll randomly think of from time to time, and a big reason why I always make sure my doors are locked. There's this guy from uni who added me on all social medias. I didn't pay attention to it until my friends noticed him following us around and staring at me from a distant table. I found it really weird as we've never spoken at all. One day, I was trying to catch the elevator, and upon reaching it I said thanks, and saw the creepy guy holding the button to keep the elevator from closing. I instantly hesitated, but felt bad for making other people wait, so I decided to just go for it and press the 4th floor. When it reached the 2nd floor, a group of people were about to leave, and they called the creepy guy's attention, asking if he's going with them, and the creepy guy declined, saying he'll just follow them later. I didn't really give it a thought until it stopped on the 3rd floor and everyone else left. I felt like I died and panicked a little when there was only me and the creepy guy in the elevator. The moment the doors closed, he started singing one of those opera musics, which still creeps me out to this day. But the moment the door opened, I literally ran out. His talking did not stop here, but I'm thankful for my friends who always made sure I'm safe. One day, a friend and I were just aimlessly driving around our small town with nothing better to do. We get beside someone with a hoodie on, hood up, and it looks like they're belting out to a song on their stereo, which, not even being rude, we just really enjoyed. So we had rolled down her window and were being stupid, saying things like, "Yeah, sing it," and gave a thumbs up before driving on. Mind you, we really weren't being assholes, and we were both smiling because it just seemed like this other person was having a fun time. Well, we then realized after a few blocks and a couple of turns that same car is behind us and following oddly close. It's a small town, so we think maybe they're just going around the same area, but we made a few more turns and they stuck right behind us, clearly following us. So we maneuver and managed to get away by passing through a yellow light, and they were stuck at the red. We get to her apartment because we're both a little creeped out, and I'm grabbing some things from her back seat, and she yells, "Oh my god, that car is coming." I think she's joking, so I'm not rushing until I see her running for the stairs up to her apartment, and that fucking car is coming right up to me. So I book it up the stairs into her apartment, and we shut and lock the door, hoping that is the end of it. A couple minutes pass, and someone is pounding on her front door. It's definitely the person from the car. So I open the door with the chain after my friend is begging me not to, but this person isn't leaving, just continuing to pound on the door. I ask why they followed us and are now pounding on the door, and by this point see it's a woman. She says she followed us because we were being fucking rude and screaming at her while she was on the phone with a friend. I tell her the truth, that we didn't even see she was on the phone, and with her hood up, it just looked like some guy singing along to the radio, and we just thought it was a fun moment, and we didn't scream at her, just encouraged her to keep singing and gave a thumbs up. "Oh, so you're saying I look like a fucking man? Open the fucking door." At this point, I'm pretty baffled and tell her that I didn't say she looks like a man, and it's fucking insane that she has followed us to someone's home because she felt we interrupted her phone conversation in the privacy of her car, which she did not have the windows down, and so she likely could barely hear us. And if she didn't leave, I was going to call the police because I wouldn't be opening the door. She continues to curse at me and go off about us being rude and just flipping out. I was pretty over it at that point and told her she was clearly fucked up on something to take something like this so far, and told her I was calling the police if she didn't leave. She says to call the police because she smelled weed. I said okay, closed the door and got my phone ready, but as soon as the door closed, she ran off back to her car and left. Not to be judgy, but yeah, she absolutely looked like your typical meth head, and I guess maybe we were rude and being dumb kids on a summer day, but my god, one line and a thumbs up got us chased and stalked down. What is the scariest, creepiest thing that happened to you as a kid or teen? I was 8 years old at the time, and I was in bed at the stage of sleepiness where you can feel yourself drifting off, or so I thought. I must have been dreaming, because my entire body jerked as I felt the two hands off my papa, who lived a good few hours away, grab my ankles and drag me. I woke up almost halfway down my bed with my legs dangling off the edge. I couldn't shake the horrible grin he had on his face, so I went to wake my mom. She sat up with me, and about an hour later, she got a call saying that he had passed away pretty much at the same time I woke up from that dream. Freaky. Scarier for me than my mom, I think. One day, when I was maybe 4, she took the laundry out to hang it on the line in the backyard. Our house was surrounded by woods, and we didn't have any fence around the yard. Since her hands were full, she left the back door open when she went out. I just remember sitting on the couch watching a cartoon, and all of a sudden, there was a huge brown dog in front of me. I think it was some kind of German Shepherd mix. Our couch was up against the wall, so I scrambled up on the back of the couch and just froze. It very easily could have just grabbed me and ended me, but it sat down and just looked at me instead. Needless to say, my mom came in from hanging laundry, poked her head into the living room just to check on me, and just about died when she saw this huge-ass dog in there with her small child. I remember her using a weirdly calm voice to talk to it while she walked over to open our front door. The dog ran right out, and then she started crying, which really confused little me. She didn't ever leave doors open after that. In hindsight, I think it was just a cool, well-behaved dog that got away from a neighbor, but very scary at the time. On my way home from a friend's house, some dude at the bus stop started questioning me regarding personal details. My dumbass, not wanting to be rude, answered a few questions and told him what stop I get off at. He ended up sitting next to me in a pretty empty bus. I was pretty creeped out, so when the bus pulled up to a busy intersection, I quickly ran out and he yelled that this wasn't my stop. I ran into a busy coffee shop and called my dad to pick me up. I've posted this before, but a couple of years ago, I had a very detailed dream where I was in a new school in a small town in the mountains called Lacoma or something, but for some reason it felt off. The physical appearance of the outside of the building was like my old school, and I can't remember the inside, but I remember going to leave school at sunset, and the bus coming to school to bring us home already had kids in it. The kids got off, but all looked wrinkled, as if they were old, but looked like a kid in every other way. The bus looked strange, with about 6 feet of empty space behind the driver and the actual seats in the back left corner, which were just some holes. But the weird part is, on the bus ride home, the bus drove along a small road on the side of a small mountain inside of a valley, which will be important later. Eventually, I was at home, and I look outside to see a dark figure, so I run and try to scream, but I can't make noise. I make it upstairs into my brother's room to find my mom laying on his bed motionless. After about 10 seconds of trying to wake her up, I back up, still terrified, into something cold. It was the figure that was following me. Then, I wake up terrified as usual whenever I have a bad dream, but this time was weird. For some reason, the name of the small village stuck with me. A few days later, I go on Google Earth and search up Lacoma, and 3 results popped up. So I clicked on one in northeastern Spain in the mountains, and I shit you not, it's the inside of the valley, up on the road where the bus went through. I got chills and wondered if I had never been of that place or heard of that place, and if it had somehow made its way into my dream. But living in a small town, and the town in Spain being even smaller, I don't know how to explain it. TLDR. I had a dream about an extremely specific location, found the real place with the same name and details. Oh, I just remembered another thing. A couple of years ago, my family was visiting my other family in Puerto Rico, and so we always stay at my grandma's house. Well, my dad and my mom went somewhere, and me and my brother and my cousin stayed at my grandma's. We were all playing, and then we hear the doorbell. We were going to answer, but then my grandma said to everyone to hide in the bedroom now. It was some weird, creepy people dressed in all black with weird umbrellas, and they had come before. To be honest, where my grandma lives is a bit of the dangerous side. We can't go outside at night, and we can't go left of my grandma's house. She lives on the corner of a street, because a bad man lives there. I don't remember the story of the bad man, but he either killed someone or did something else. Either way, he was in jail for a while. I had psychosis as a kid. I also had severe anxiety. I was scared of everything. At the same time, I was often delusional or paranoid or hallucinating. It just made everything worse. I don't know why this moment came to mind when I saw this post, but I guess it's the one I'm going with. In grade 2, our classroom had a little bookshelf, and one of the books on it was a scary storybook. I actually found it again as an adult and read through it. It was completely ridiculous, and the stories were only a few sentences long each. Apparently, as an 8-year-old, it was the most terrifying thing ever. The one story that really got me was the one about a girl's head falling off. I pictured the image of this headless woman in my mind, and it haunted me. Every night was agony as I lay in bed, fearing that at any moment the headless girl would enter my room. I used to also call out to my mom at night often because I'd be scared. One night, I was alone in my room in the middle of the night when everyone else was sleeping, and I should have been doing that as well. It was dark, but not pitch black. I cried out to my mom to come in because I was scared. Remember the part earlier where I said I had hallucinations? Sometimes when I called my mom, my dad would come instead. On this particular night, when I called out to my mom, my dad came into my room. He was completely headless. I yelled out in fear and covered my eyes with my blankets, only being brave enough to peek out again when I heard my dad's voice. When I looked back, both of my parents were standing there, heads attached. The relief I felt was immense, but I made my dad sleep next to me for the rest of the night. When I was 13, I was out hunting with my father for a nice whitetail. When he was on the trail, we saw plenty of blood and tracks and an empty cartridge. We ended up following the trail to find a dead man in the middle of the trail with a deer antler stuck in his stomach. As a young lad, I was terrified, trying to see if the clearly dead man was alive. We just tried to help a friendly hunter on his trail to end up finding a horribly fucked up corpse. I was in 3rd grade watching VeggieTales with my little sister in our parents' room. Suddenly, everything starts shaking and the walls start cracking. Our parents run in and grab and shield us. Shortly after, my parents packed bags for us and rushed us out of the house. We had no idea what was going on, as we had just moved to Hawaii and hadn't ever been in an earthquake. But this was the 6-point-something earthquake on the Big Island in '06. As a little kid, I thought the world was ending and swallowing us whole. The Jeep-sized rocks we had to swerve while driving away during the tsunami evacuation that followed definitely reinforced that idea. When I was about 7, my friend and our families went to Cabo San Lucas. One night, around 10, my friend and I were in his hotel room and we thought we heard someone talking or chatting outside. So naturally we opened the door thinking it was our moms, but no one was outside. So we looked down the hall both ways, right then left, and didn't see anyone. So we looked at each other in confusion, and as we were about to dismiss it, we turned to the right to go back inside. We saw a tall lady with black hair in a white dress at the end of the hall, facing away from us, and as soon as we saw her, she turned around quick and started coming toward us fast. But when she moved, her dress didn't move, and it was almost as if she was floating. Her hair was in her face, but as she moved, it didn't move either. So we ran back inside and locked all the doors and hid behind the bed in the back corner of the hotel room. Nothing happened after that, and it was pretty quiet for the next 5 minutes. So eventually we got up and went to the door to look through the peephole and didn't see anyone. Then we opened the door and peeked our heads out to check again, and no one was there. So we went back inside, locked all the doors, and called our parents. Later, we learned about Yailona, and we realized it was her, and we had seen. When I was 12, I was staying overnight at my friend's house, and we were up all night playing Super Nintendo. It was storming, and I happened to glance out his window and saw a guy standing on the sidewalk across the street, dressed what looked to be a trench coat and hat. I couldn't see his face, but it seemed he was staring at the house. I called my friend over and he saw him as well, but when we looked away and back again, the dude was gone. This was on a military base, mind you. My friend figured it had something to do with my dad's job, but he didn't go into details. But why would some guy be standing in a torrential storm at 4 a.m. because of his dad's job? My friends and I have always been into spooky stuff. As teens, we would go ghost hunting and explore abandoned places. One night, we were out cruising around and drove into a cemetery that opened up toward the back end, which housed tons of mausoleums. My friend and I were in the back of the car and couldn't really hear the conversation going on up front due to the radio, so we shouted for them to turn it down. The radio wasn't on. When I was around 10, my friends and I did our own version of witchcraft like spells and Ouija board and hung out in the cemetery. I used to talk to a dead girl, but I was probably being imaginative. I don't have any clear memories of that as if it was real, but anyways, I would have super scary dreams with like the same kind of demon trying to kill me or possess me pretty much daily for a period of time. They really freaked me out, and often I would have the same dream multiple times. One night, I woke up to the sound of my computer's keyboard keys being typed on. I was terrified and made sure I was awake by pinching my cheeks. No one was there, and it was the middle of the night. Another time, I was showering, and when I went to grab some soap, I saw out of the corner of my eyes a boy's face peeking in around the curtain. When I whipped the curtain back, no one was there. I still frequently have nightmares, and they always involved some kind of supernatural element that's trying to hurt me. But the dreams I had as a kid were unique to themselves, and I haven't had any like those since. Also, a few years ago, I was sitting in the living room at night watching TV when I saw in the dark window a face looking at me from outside. I screamed and jumped up because I thought it was my brother trying to fuck with me because it looked like him. I opened the front door and went out to yell at him, but no one was there. I called him and he said he was at his house, which I knew was true due to background noise. The weird thing was that both those times it looked like me because even though one was a kid and the other was a man's face. And no, my brother isn't a weirdo stalker and he doesn't have the motivation or incentive to mess with me like that. When I was 13, I lived in the Midwestern southern region of the United States in Tornado Alley. There was one day in May where the weather had been getting worse as the day went on, but no one really thought anything of it since it happened so often. Even then, my anxiety was heightened because of it, so I wound up sleeping with my parents that night. Come 11:30 p.m. or so, I'm woken up by my dad carrying me into the bedroom closet, and when he sets me down, I notice that my brother and mom are also sitting there. I hadn't started processing sound, still half asleep, but once I did, all I heard was something similar to 100 people using jackhammers at full force on our roof. Turns out, it was a mix of the hail and rain absolutely pummeling our roof. It went on for about a minute before we heard the tornado siren start going off, and we could hear multiple ones near our house. We would later find out it was the only time in the history of our city that every single tornado siren had been activated at the same time during the same storm. So there's the sirens, the hail, the rain, the wind, the thunder, and the lightning, and it went on for a good 15 minutes. I was shaking so hard because of how terrified I was that I genuinely thought I was going to vomit, and my parents were praying. They hadn't prayed in years, and that's when I realized we were fucked. Eventually the storm ended and moved on, and when we walked outside, the only thing you could see on anyone's lawn were insane amounts of baseball-sized hail. Our car still has dents in it to this day. This was in 2013. A few days later, we found out that there were 5 to 6 tornadoes that had touched down during that storm, all scattered across the city. One of them had touched down about 1 to 2 miles away from my house, and if the storm had kept going, I'm pretty sure it would have ripped right through our neighborhood and our house. TLDR. Almost got taken out by a tornado when I was 13. It's not real, but the dream haunts me to this day. When I was much younger, I had a dream my mom took me to this creepy hotel. While she was at the desk, I ran up the very long staircase to the first floor. It was totally haunted. It was a dream, but I'll never forget the unwavering sensation of evil, like a weight in your stomach, and the feeling of nausea. It was clearly abandoned, but I remember the feeling of eyes staring daggers in my back and the laughing and talking voices, but I can't remember what they were saying. I ran down the hallway running for my life like something was chasing me, and I found this hole in the wall to my right that led to a yellow slide. I went down it and I could see names and dates, and I saw my name and a date. I didn't know what the dates were for, but it's like I just knew they were death dates. To this day, I don't remember what my date was, but I remember December, so I assume I'll die sometime in a December. After I got off the slide, I went to my mom and the clerk at the desk gave me a creepy look. I don't remember much else beyond that, but that's the absolute creepiest thing to happen to me that at least stuck with me. Still waiting on the whole death thing. I was watching some shitty horror movie when I was 12. It was getting to the climax of the movie, and right as the main character dramatically said, "He's here," and the killer cut the lights, my power went out and my dog, who had been napping beside me, began to growl at something. I grabbed a flashlight and he was just fixated at nothing. But his hackles were raised, power goes back on, and suddenly he snaps back to reality and went back to sleep. I was scared shitless. I only just recently discovered that one of my childhood memories was a lot more fucked up than I perceived it. I was 4 to 5 years old, and my mother had taken me to some event in a shopping center. After the event, there was a crowd of running and screaming kids, and the parents trying to leave. A man grabbed my hand and started walking off with me. My mother came out of nowhere like a lioness and tore me away from the man. The man turned around and said, "Oh, sorry, my son is wearing the exact same outfit." That's where my memory ends recently. I brought it up over dinner, and my mother told me that after the man said that, she tried getting security, but when she turned back around, the man had jogged out of the entrance with no kids of his own in sight and left. Really creeped me out. What's the scariest thing that has ever happened to you but no one believes? So I don't know if this fits, but one night as a kid, I had a dream that my friends and I would go find crayfish, no big deal. In that dream, we found crayfish, carried them in buckets. We did this often, but in the dream, my cousin slipped on the rocks and hurt his arm, and I woke up. The next week, we all went out, and my cousin slipped on the rocks and broke his arm. It freaked me out for months. Most recent, probably when I was working night nurse around 3 a.m. charting at my desk, very clearly felt someone place their hand on my shoulder, then tug on the bottom of my scrub. No one else around, nothing on the camera, but you could see my scrub move and the shadows around me waver. Or when the lady that talked in third person and said, "My name isn't Alice," in a creepy possessed voice, was in that room around 2 a.m. giving her meds, and someone knocked 3 times on her door. I was the only one in the building at the time. Names changed. I was playing outside by myself and a truck kept driving down the streets. I got uncomfortable and started to walk home. They followed. I stopped. They stopped. I ran. They drove faster. I started sprinting home, and when I came near other people, they turned around and drove away. When I arrived home, I told my mom and dad. Nobody believed me. It's been 5 years and I'm still shocked. My bathroom is weird. One time it illuminated from the outside as if someone put headlights up to the window. Empty lots behind me and next to me. No outside light source. Same bathroom. I often find the bottom vanity drawer pulled completely out and on the floor. It would have to be lifted off the rollers. Same bathroom. Cat was growing and freaking out and doing the stalk stance. This isn't quite the scariest, but it scared the shit out of me and I doubt anyone would believe me. First of all, I live alone and at the time had 2 cats. I have one of those galaxy projection lights, the kind that basically project something onto your ceiling. It has an IR or Bluetooth connection because it uses a remote to change the colors and settings on it. It also has a speaker on it for some reason to let you know if the remote is connected. One night, I had it turned off and sitting in my chair next to my bed. I was in a deep sleep when I heard the voice toggling on and off saying, "Bluetooth disconnected." That was the initial thing that scared me because all I could hear was this disembodied voice. I found the source quickly and realized I had thrown some clothes over it so the IR port was blocked. I fell back to sleep and was awoken again, this time in the morning, by a male voice saying, "Oh, hello Blaze." It was coming from the direction of the light. Blaze is the name of my cat. I laid still for a moment, my heart pounding. I rolled over and found my cat sitting on the other side of my bed. He was in the room. That scared the shit out of me even more. I leapt out of bed and ran over to the thing and ripped it out of the wall. I haven't turned it on since. It's been sitting in a corner of my room with the plug detached. I'm afraid to plug it back in. I would blame hypogogic hallucinations because I have had them before, mostly my mom's voice calling my name. But the fact that the cat was in fact in my room, sitting basically in front of the light, terrified me. My cats don't have collars or bells, so it's not like I would have passively heard him in my sleep coming into my room and then imagined the voice. Not only that, but he seemed freaked out too, like he had heard the voice as well. I have no idea if it was that or he was just reacting to me waking up. I inspected the whole device, looking for cameras and microphones. I was going to take it apart, but I was too scared of what I would find. I was 4 years old. My dad says I slipped going down a flight of stairs. He says I was somersaulting to a point I landed perfectly on my feet at the bottom and just kept waddling on. Unfortunately, however, hitting the stairs on the way down fractured the left one in 8 places. Ostriches are not friendly. I used to run on this back road with my dogs, and at the end of the road before I turned around to run back, there was a pond. As I'd get closer, I would see an ostrich come into view with a little baby, and they would watch us run by. One day, I'm running and I feel something behind me, so I turn back and see this T-Rex looking ostrich running after us, starting to close in on us. I'd been running a lot at the time, so I started hauling ass. My dogs thought this was a game, but I'd seen what ostriches can do to people, and I didn't want any part of it. It's about 50 yards behind me, gaining quickly, and is massive and looks very angry. Just then, a green truck comes sideways around a curve and pushes the ostrich off of our tail. It was the local game warden, and he pulled up laughing his ass off. I was very thankful, as I thought it was my final run. Turns out, they'd been working on trapping them and getting them to an animal rescue, but they had only caught the baby so far. He decided to come check on the trap, at the right time and saw the protective mama coming after the runner that she probably thought stole her baby. Game wardens wear a lot of hats. This was in San Angelo, Texas. Edit, spelling, and punctuation. I was using resistance bands to exercise in our school gym. We had double doors with the post in the middle so the doors could close. So I wrapped the band around the post, I started pulling, and a loose screw popped out. So the post came flying out at me, only 1 or 2 inches from my neck, pretty close to one of those blood vessels too. Luckily, it hit me closer to my shoulder instead, but I still landed on my back from the force. If not for the gym teacher, nurse, and 4 or 5 students, no one would believe it. So there's this local legend that there's a cult that practices deep in the woods in my area. One night, my friend and I decided to go on a hike in the woods at like 1 a.m. He said he knew the area. I did not at all. Unsurprisingly, he gets us lost. As we're wandering around aimlessly, we hear what sounds like dozens of voices chanting all at once. Immediately, first assumption is we found the cult, because this is literally like 2 miles into the woods off of the road that's in the middle of nowhere, no houses or anything for miles. We walk closer to investigate because we're actual idiots, and this coyote appears on the trail in front of us. I swear it was some kind of spiritual thing or something, because it literally appeared out of nowhere. My friend gets spooked and threw a gallon of milk at it. He brought the milk with him to drink. He's a strange one, lol. Coyote runs off. We decide that we should probably rethink our investigation, especially considering we probably made enough noise to alert them anyway. I tell people this story and they find it entertaining, but I don't think anyone actually believes me, lol. I grew up in a haunted house. Nobody believes me most of the shit that happened to me. The top out of everything was nobody believes I was yanked out of my bed by my ankles in the middle of the night. When I had gone to our hometown, I was playing with the local kids, and I was it. We were playing hide and seek, and as I counted to 50, I suddenly fell on the ground for some second, and I felt like I had 0 strength, could not lift even my hands and leg. And when I told my mom, she told me that it must be because I was hungry, but I had eaten watermelon with the local kids just before playing hide and seek. That was the scariest thing I've felt so far. I was not able to move even an inch of my body. I remember vividly where I was when Kim Jong-un died. I remember the room around me. I remember the position I was in. I remember all the details of the room while I argued on the internet with someone. But in reality, I remember that I was in my old house in Caserta, where actually by the time that he died, I already moved to Naples and had a completely different room than the one I remember being in when I found out about him. I still can't understand it. Nearly empty church, almost alone at 8 p.m. in the middle of winter, so it was pitch black outside. I was looking for the bathroom and I heard the sound of glass shattering and loud laughter. When I returned back to my group, nobody else believed me. Not to sound like half the posts on here, but I grew up in a haunted house. My parents still live there to this day. Most traumatic experience of my life. The one memory that tops the list is one I hate telling and rarely do. I would always wake up in the middle of the night and see shit, from as young as I can remember until I moved out at 18. One night, I was about 6, maybe, woke up to see a man and a woman both dressed in all white, palest skin I'd ever seen, both standing at the foot of my bed looking out the window. The woman looked average height while the man reached the ceiling. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, until the man turned and looked at me. His eyes were red. I turned sideways and covered my head, trying again to convince myself I was dreaming. After a few minutes, I looked over the covers, and the man was now standing at the side of my bed, looking down at me. I remember nothing after. I talked to a specialist when I was older, thinking maybe I suffered from sleep paralysis due to these experiences, but that was not the case. In every experience, I could move, and even ran out of my bedroom multiple times. Great times. What's the most fucked up thing you did that still haunts you to this day? In 5th grade, a girl told her friend that she liked me. I found out and left a letter on her desk to ask her to the upcoming 5th grade dance. When she found out, she came over and said, "Is this a joke?" Probably because she was bullied a lot. Freaking out, I said, "Yeah, it was a joke." She cried. Ended up going to senior prom with her after reconnecting though. Bored in the house one day alone when I was about 10, so decided to give my dog a shower. I genuinely loved my dog. He was my best friend growing up, but for some unknown reason, I decided to turn the shower onto hot water only, extremely hot, and started showering him. There was a delay, I guess, in him reacting because his fur was so thick, which meant I kept it on him for a few seconds. Suddenly, he started yelping like dogs do when in pain. His instincts were to not be aggressive or try to escape, but just looked at me scared and confused. I panicked, smashed on the cold, and cooled him down as quick as I could. Fortunately, he was not burnt or had any ongoing issues. He never even lost trust in me. I felt physically sick and ashamed of myself for days after, and obviously it still bothers me 20 years later. The good thing to come from this is that I was so disturbed by my action that I've never knowingly inflicted pain on anyone or anything since. When I was 14, I wrote a note to my dad telling him he shouldn't be smoking, and this is why I was taking away his full pack of cigarettes. I was taking them to smoke them. I've never regretted anything more in my life. I was at school, and for no reason at all, I eavesdropped a very private and delicate conversation between one of my teachers and her husband. Then she opened the door and saw me eavesdropping. It was beyond humiliating, and I deserved the scolding afterwards. I was young and stupid, obviously, but when I remember the look on her face, I still cringe hard, even if it's been almost 20 years. Edit. Few people ask about the conversation and my age that time, so I should clarify. It was about her then pregnancy, which later miscarried. At the time I was 13, and it was and still is way out of character to eavesdrop or meddle in others' affairs. So I really don't know what got into me, and I stood outside her office to listen. From that day on, we both knew that I knew about her miscarriage, and the feeling was extremely awkward and cringe. Had a babysitter who was a kind, middle-aged woman with no kids of her own. Her only fault was that she kept referring to herself in the third person. One day, 8-year-old me snapped at her and told her to shut the hell up. She cried. I still feel bad about it 25 years later. I was in a friend triangle in middle school where a girl I became friends with was super jealous. She manipulated me into writing absolutely vile and harassing, hate-filled notes to my other friend to prove my loyalty to her. Honestly, it was absolutely vile and wrong of me to do, and I can't believe I was weak and gullible enough to do it. Edited to add, this was in my church's youth group. I was living in a large city where aggressive panhandling is very common, especially while pumping gas. I was in my military uniform about to head to the base and had to stop and get gas. Swiped my credit card as normal and started pumping. Then after a minute or two, it clicked off at $10 or $20, can't remember, which annoyed me since I normally fill up completely and didn't feel like swiping my card again to do a second transaction. I said screw it, I'll fill up later, this will get me to base. As I go to put the pump away and get back into my car, a guy wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt approaches me and starts with, "Excuse me, mister," and since this exact scenario had happened to me countless times, followed immediately by asking for money, I cut him off and said, "Sorry man, I can't help you." As I got into my car and quickly started it up and drove off, I heard the guy say something along the lines of, "What do you mean? I just paid for your gas, that's all." And I immediately realized that the guy had noticed me and had the gas station attendant void my card swipe and paid cash for my gas, and that's why I clicked off early. And I proceeded to die inside and still cringe when I think about it. To this day, I always let strangers finish their sentence before jumping to assumptions, even though the hundreds of times it's happened since then has always been a panhandling attempt. If you're out there, man, I'm eternally sorry. Probably around 12 years old, was rollerblading with my friend in the park. Came across a picnic setup with happy birthday streamers and balloons. No one was there, so we assumed it was over and they'd left it. We proceeded to tear most of it down. As we were about to leave, a mother and her kid walk up and asked what happened. We lied and said someone else did it and then took off. Have felt absolutely terrible since. Totally ruined that kid's birthday. My husband and I bought a house and we lived across the street from a really nice old man who was probably in his mid-80s. We had just moved in and only chatted with him a few times, but it sounded like he lived alone and had adult children nearby who checked in on him regularly. He was pretty independent and walked every day and did lots of stuff around his house. One day, my husband and I were leaving and looked across the street to see our neighbor using his push mower to mow the grass. He was hanging on to the mower for balance and looked pretty wobbly. We had to meet a friend to pick up some mulch or something from our yard, which wasn't going to take long, but both said, "Oh man, let's go over and finish cutting his grass when we get back." We ran down the street and were probably gone less than 15 minutes. As we returned, we could see up ahead a fire truck, an ambulance, and several police cars. In the 15 minutes we were gone, he had fallen and hurt himself, breaking his hip. He never came back to that house again. He left and went to a hospital, then a nursing home, then died. I think about it often and wish that we had just stopped to go over and mow his grass. He probably would have told us he didn't need help, but I can't help but wonder if he maybe would have said, "Yeah, thanks for the help. I won't ever hesitate to help someone again." Smacked my stepsister across the face when I was watching her. She was 5, I was 17. I felt so bad afterwards and just profusely apologized. I was raised being abused, and the power I felt when I did that scared me to death. I have a child now and have never raised my hand to her. I had to break that cycle before it destroyed me. I shot a bird in the butt with a BB gun. It was a really weak BB gun, like you could pump it all the hell and you could see the BB begin to descend right away. The bird flew away, and it probably stung like a mother, but it was probably okay. I'm still sorry I did it. I think I was 9 years old or something. When I was like 6 or 7, I was at this big slide at the park hanging out with a bunch of other kids from the neighborhood. There was this really big, not older, just big fat kid near the slide. Whenever a kid tried to go down the slide, he would shove the crap out of them and make them fall off. None of the other kids wanted to stand up to this bully, so they didn't slide down. I went to the slide and tried to slide down, but this kid shoved me off. I went up again, told him not to do that, and tried to go down again. He shoved me again. I got mad. For the third time, I went up there and pretended like I was about to go down. When he reached to shove me, I grabbed him, threw him on the ground, punched him in the face, and started choking the crap out of him. This kid was mortified. While I was choking him, I whispered in his ear, "Stop shoving me," and then let him go. He went running off crying to his mom. I felt good for standing up to this bully. His mom went to my mom, and my mom set me aside. She said, "He's different than you. He doesn't understand what he is doing wrong." I said, "How does he not know pushing other people is wrong? I told him to stop." She said, "One day you'll understand." I do now. This kid has Down syndrome. I choked a kid with Down syndrome. I ran over a little kid with my bicycle and he started crying. I was about 8. He looked pretty hurt, but I was scared because his parents were running over, so I pedaled away fast because I was scared. I still feel really bad. Maybe it isn't all that fucked up, but it still haunts me. Boyfriend in a frat asked me to put on a blindfold and go to the basement of said frat house to have sex. He said it was some weird frat tradition and I was too drunk to ask questions. Whole frat had their way with me, and as I was oblivious at the time, I just thought and hoped my boyfriend was being weird and going in and out of me in a way he had never before. 6 years ago. I stayed oblivious, obviously protecting myself, until I moved away and went to therapy. Still haunts me to this day. I know I shouldn't feel guilty, but I do. Wish I had known better at the time. In 1983, I became convinced my fiancée had met another guy and was going to dump me. I loved her dearly, but rather than talk to her about it, I decided to go ahead and call everything off myself. She wouldn't have to do it. I'd be in control and not get dumped. I immediately started seeing someone else to ease the pain and never saw my ex-fiancée again, but I thought about her all the time. I would run into her parents from time to time around town, and about 10 years later, I was talking to her mom when her mom made a comment that made me realize that there never had been another guy. I had just broken up with her out of the blue, and she had no idea why. I remember her crying when we split up, but I thought she was just sad at it ending, but relieved that she didn't have to tell me. I still sometimes start my day listening to Randy Travis sing in 1982 while I look at our old pictures. She has a great life with a wonderful family. I have a great life with a wonderful family, but I always wonder what would have been. Was in the cab of my dad's Scania truck. He often used to let me ride along, driving at night. Must have been around 1 to 2 a.m. We're driving along at around 45 miles per hour on a pretty straight stretch of road. Couldn't see anything in front of us apart from the tarmac being lit up a small distance ahead by the headlights. We saw headlights approaching us in the opposite direction for the first time in what must have been an hour. I jokingly said, "Haha, finally another human." Then, as it got within like 50 meters of passing us, a figure, probably a person, runs out in front of us and lays down horizontally in the middle of the road. Now, note that the other car is approaching fast. Because of this, We could not swerve into the other lane to avoid it, and it was too late to stop, even though my dad had started braking, and to our right were hedges directly beside the road, so we couldn't swerve off the road either. My dad is now blaring the air horn and whispering, "Shit, shit, shit, get out of the fucking road." And I just told him, "Dad, there's nothing we can do, just drive." And a few seconds after I said that, we both felt the truck drive straight over it. I told my dad we had to stop and see if he's still alive. There was no chance. But he told me that he had heard things like this from his friend who was also a trucker. Apparently, vehicle robberies are often planned like this. Person lies in the road, vehicle stops, gang pops out and hijacks vehicle. It wasn't my fault, but I still have a bit of guilt in the back of my mind that I was the reason why that person was dead, because I told my dad to just keep driving, although he was going to do that anyway, because what else could one have done in that situation? I will never forget that bump I felt as we ran them over. Note, we did call the police about the incident. My father was not charged with anything since we had a dash cam recording the whole thing. I was in my mid-20s, going to college in Portland when I met this girl, Kay. Only time in my life to this day where I felt smitten when meeting someone. She was the most beautiful, intelligent, quirky, funny woman I've ever met in my life. We hung out every day we had free time for the next unforgettable 9 months of my life. Fast forward, I had graduated and taken a job at another city about 8 hours away. We decided on doing long distance while she applied for medical school and finished her prereqs. One night, she called me crying and told me she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She was only 27 at the time. Looking back, my attempt at comforting her was pathetic. Shortly after the news, I ended up cheating on her with a girl I met out at the bars with my new coworkers. This was right before Kay was coming to visit me. I thought I could keep the secret, no one had to know, and I could just learn my lesson from there. Kay was smarter than that. She would end up finding out. We broke up via text as she had left and never spoke again. For me, life went a little off the rails after that, and I ended up getting a therapist. For years, I would think of Kay at least once a month and hope she was doing okay. I dreamed about calling her and giving a proper apology for my actions, but never worked up the courage. It had taken me a long time in therapy to even touch the subject and explore why I treated her the way I did, why I cheated on her, how I could do that to her, etc. Fast forward 4 years after these events, I was at work one day sending a Venmo payment. I noticed we were still connected on that app as she had blocked me from all other forms of social media. I reached out to her, requesting if she'd accept a phone call from me. She said yes, gave me her number, and said she was free right now to talk. My heart was pounding. I stepped out of my office to call her. We talked for a half hour or so. I apologized for all the cowardly things I had done, for wronging her the way that I did. She had a lot of questions. Why call me now? Why did you do those things? It was really difficult answering them, but she deserved it at the very least. She told me she beat her breast cancer and was currently in medical school on her way to becoming a doctor. As we ran out of things to talk about, I thanked her for taking the time to hear my apology. She told me a late apology is better than never receiving one, and that now we can both find peace with it. I'll never forget those words from her. Although I still think of her often, I've made peace with it. She is my reminder to never ever treat someone so horribly the way I did to her. As a kid, 12 years old or so, I forgot to put my mother's bird back in its cage in the morning. When I got back from school, our cat had eaten it. That bird was older than me and my older brother and had been with my mother since before she married my dad. The images of the feathers spread over the kitchen and basement and the leftover body parts still haunt me and make me feel guilty to this day. I'll be 26 soon. My dad is really strict and controlling. Won't even let me hang out with my friends or go on trips with them anywhere. I say the truth to my friends that I want to come and dad won't let me. This created a bad image of my dad on my friends. Once, my brother brought my dad to the football field while we were playing with my friends. I said to him privately, "You'll embarrass me," to him. He acted like he got a phone call and left. I didn't want to change my friend's perspective that he was a fun guy, which he is not 95% of the time. Still keeps me up at night. One of the things I regret most in my life. I was going through a rough patch in my life and drinking heavily. My father tried to lecture me on my drinking, which he had always been really cool about. I told him that I didn't want to hear it, and in fact, I didn't want to hear from him for a month. He'd call me every day or two. I'd silence it, and he'd leave a message about normal stuff, having iced tea in the rocking chair on the porch or something. 29 days into my radio silence, my dad died due to heart complications that nobody knew about. I was kind of his only friend in life and really let him down in the end. Still chokes me up a bit. When I was a young kid, maybe 7 or 8, I was trying to catch a little toad. I picked him up and he peed in my hand, so I threw him on the ground in anger and disgust. Poor thing was still alive, but some organs or something were out of his mouth. I immediately felt horrific. I still think about that over 20 years later and feel the same sadness and regret. Now I do my best to be good to animals. I try not to kill bugs, but move them outside. If I see worms on the sidewalk or in a dry area, I'll stop what I'm doing to pick them up and move them to safety. But even then, it won't bring back that poor toad or erase the horrible death I gave it. What's the creepiest thing someone has ever told you? When I was at university, during the summer I go back home and work on farms, mostly picking up hay. Every year there'd be different workers, some good, some bad, some, well, one downright scary. This one bloke had been in the mongrel mob, a gang in New Zealand which tends to attract the absolute scum of society. He, though, wasn't too bad a chap, quite funny and hard-working, just what you want on your team when you're spending 10 hours a day picking up hay bales. One day, I was driving the truck to another farm with him riding shotgun. We started talking about one of the other workers. I knew him from uni, and he had come up for the work on my suggestion. At uni, he seemed a decent sort, but he soon showed his true colors of being a useless, racist POS. I was complaining about the useless prick, apologizing for being responsible for him being there. I jokingly suggested maybe we could arrange a farm accident, tractor back over him, a stack of hay bales collapse on him, that sort of thing. At this point, the mongrel mobster casually mentioned he knew people who, for just $5,000, would kill and dispose of anyone. Said they had a setup out in the bush, New Zealand speak for middle of nowhere, where they'd feed the body to pigs, then dispose of any remains, teeth, bones, in an acid bath. The completely casual way he spoke of this was really unsettling. Towards the end of our marriage, my ex-husband got really angry with me one day and began to explain in detail how he could murder me and get away with it. He laid out every detail and gave rationales behind each one to prove why his method would be foolproof and result in him never getting caught. It really made me open my eyes to his abuse and fear for my life, knowing he had been meticulously planning this out in his head. It made it worse that he had gotten to the point that he was comfortable sharing this with me, as if I wouldn't be around long enough to do anything about it. I went to middle school in a not-so-good neighborhood, so lots of kids were involved in gang activity. This one kid had some anger issues, but honestly wasn't a bad person, and we all got along well. One day in class, he leans over and asks, "Do you want to see it?" And before I could reply, he flashes a gun from his bag. Immediately my face fell, and he follows it up with, "Don't worry, you're good." This could have very easily been a much worse situation. Middle school me wasn't smart enough to tell anyone, but I told him to leave it home since the staff could check our lockers and bags. I wasn't worried about him using it at school, but I should have been. Thank goodness nothing ever happened. Worked in a phone-in gambling/betting place in OZ while I was traveling and mainly did the night shift. One of the regulars was winning a lot and kept placing higher and higher bets, which I red flag. I asked him about how his night is going and why the big bets, and he told me it was the anniversary of his son's suicide and he was trying to lose all his money and do the same, but he kept winning. After this, he didn't call again. Police were called and they did a check-in, and he ended up getting rushed to the hospital but was okay and betting again the next week normally and acted like nothing had ever happened. It was the most normal tone. He said it on the phone and even laughed at, "I'm just trying to lose my money and end it all, but just my luck, I can't even lose," sort of comment that creeped me out, and that I've probably thought about this more than he has since it happened. The one that sticks out the most is when I was 18 and working in a music store. A man asked for some help finding some CDs, so he gives me the names and I don't see it on the shelf, but we had all our understock under the shelves, so I went on my hands and knees to look, found the CDs and grabbed the album he wanted, stood up and said, "Here you go, that should be all the ones you wanted," and before I could say anything else he goes, "I bet you spend a lot of time on your hands and knees, huh?" in a rather sexual, suggestive tone. I had no idea what to do, so just awkwardly giggled and asked if he needed any more help finding things, and he said no. So then I quickly ran into the back and waited 5-ish minutes for him to check out and leave. My brother, who has been addicted to drugs in the past, told me a story about a meth binge I'll never forget. He claimed to have been up for 2 weeks straight on the stuff, and on the last night he was alone, driving around at night, and he said he felt like he was the only person in the world. No other cars or people were in his perception. He made it to his driveway, and said the moment he turned off the car, there was suddenly a massive army of shadow people outside his car, kicking and screaming at him. He said it felt like someone was shaking the car around and trying to open the door. He decided to open it, and as soon as he did, they all vanished, and he was alone again. He said that experience made him eventually quit, and he's been clean for over a year now. I was 6. I was walking down the sidewalk with my cousins. Some homeless man grabs my arm and holds me. My cousins kept walking and didn't realize at first. The old homeless man points to some building across the street and says to me, "Your daddy's in there." My mother, brother, and I went down to the shore to spend time with my mom's side of the family. My dad didn't come because he wasn't able to get off of work. I was confused as hell. I was like, "What? My dad's not there. My dad's at home." And this man held me tighter and kept repeating, "Your daddy's in there." A few minutes later, my cousin realized I was missing and came back for me. They asked me what that was about, and I told them. We were all pretty young at the time and didn't fully understand, but I think I almost got kidnapped. We didn't tell our parents or anything because I didn't think any of us realized the potential danger I was in. It was wild. I used to have this really weird classmate that I dated for only 2 months because of the pressure she put me under. One night, I wake up to see her outside my window just staring. She looked up at me, pointed, and then fell backwards, completely unconscious. Turns out she had a stroke. Could be wrong, since the doctor at my town diagnosed my grandmother with cancer when she really had pneumonia. Anyway, she told a load of people I gave her the stroke, and then a few days later caught me off guard and told me that I was lucky for being such a light sleeper. I didn't sleep for days after that. What's worse, however, is I didn't tell anyone what she had said. Around 8 years old, I was waiting outside the Disneyland bathroom for my dad, who was in there for a while now, long line, and some guy who looked like a grandfather came up to me and yelled in a shaky voice, "Come on, Jake, I can't stand here forever." I'm a girl, so that made it even weirder. At first, I thought he was talking to someone else, but he came closer and got irritated, saying, "Jake, don't ignore me." I started looking at him with a clearly confused face, trying to signal that I don't know who the fuck Jake is, please go away. But he got even closer and grabbed my arms and started pulling me away, saying, "We're going to sit down now, Jake, come on." I was trying to stay put, but this guy was strong, and eventually my legs wouldn't stay, and he effectively dragged me out of my place. At this point, I started screaming, but it was more unintelligible shrieks, and people must have thought that I really was Jake, and I was just resisting. Not that I didn't even know who the fuck this guy was. Luckily, though, my dad came out of the bathroom then and pulled me back and started yelling at the guy. The security got involved, and apparently the guy's grandson was named Jake, who had a seizure and died inside that bathroom over a year ago. The grandfather has some form of Alzheimer's and stayed there every weekend, just waiting for his grandson to come out of the bathroom. During high school, we were returning from a trip of 10 days taken by our school during the vacation. We had returned at night and were divided into groups according to our location and boarded bus likewise. Luckily, my friend and I were on the same bus since I was staying at her place for the night and returning home the next day. The bus we were on had only a few students in it, and my friend chose to sit second to last seat of the bus. We were just having fun during the long bus trip and gradually fell asleep. Suddenly, she grabbed my arm painfully and whispered in my ear, "There's someone in the back seat. Please look behind you." Mind you, there was no light, and the seats in the back were empty. I was shit scared and refused, but she begged me to. I slowly turned my head, praying to God, and of course nothing was there. I quickly turned and said nothing was there. She didn't reply, and I realized she fell asleep. We had a quick break in the middle of the road for bathroom breaks, and I asked her what the fuck that was about. She was surprised and said, "Oh, shit, did I really say that to you? I actually dreamt a woman sitting right behind us and asked you to turn and confirm it. I couldn't sleep the whole trip and sang songs to keep my mind from going there." Forgotten name and I, imagine him covered in blood laying against the wall, finally being quiet. The him was a 2-year-old boy. The dude was just some guy she brought home and allowed him to stay. I was wary prior to that comment. A few weeks before this, she allowed that kid to put 12 pieces of gum in his mouth and run around my apartment. I was terrified he'd choke. I persuaded him to spit it out. I couldn't believe it. 45 minutes later, I reported her to Child Protective Services. What the fuck? That's something no parent should ever imagine. I drove by your house the other day and watched you change. He proceeded to tell me what I had been wearing and what I changed into. He described my clothes 100% accurately. Let me put this into perspective. At the time, I was 15. He was 26. My bedroom was in the basement, and he literally had to be hiding in the bushes in order to see through my window and blinds, as there were massive, thick bushes covering them. I hung blankets over my windows immediately, and I've had blackout curtains in every house I've ever lived in since. A few months after that incident, I got a random call from a woman asking if I knew this guy. She asked if anything ever happened to me and if I was okay. Turns out he was arrested for rape and had a room filled with photos of all the women he was stalking. My photo and address were on his wall. I used to drive a tasty cake truck a few years back. In my truck, I had a curtain hanging on a tension rod to keep the heat in from during the winter. The truck barely had heat, so I did what I could to keep warm. Anyway, I was in my truck putting this deli's orders together, and the owner comes out knocking on my door. I ignored it, but then he opened my door. He reached in and tried touching me, but I backed away and told him, "Don't do that." He looked at the curtain and says, the things I could do to you back there, and nobody would know. I grabbed my order, served his store, and took off fast. So I tell my boss, older Italian dude. Well, him and his friend go there on a Saturday for a talk with the owner. Not only did I not have to serve him again, but I lost my damn curtain. Creepy, sad. Special needs kid at my school hated the word banana. People would scream it at him and he would freak the fuck out, run away, scream, and sometimes get aggressive. One day, a bunch of kids surrounded him and just started shouting banana. He clawed at the floor with his fingernails, screamed bloody murder, covered his ears. It was seeing him claw at the gravel that fucked me up the most until a guidance counselor comes running up, thank God, and ushers him away. This kid lived in my neighborhood and was the son of the HOA fuckwads. I was curious. I went and asked the counselor what it was that made him respond like that. The kid was apparently deathly allergic to bananas, so when he heard the word, it triggered him so viscerally he would imagine himself dying, see and smell corpses all around him. Years later, as someone chronically afraid of death and who suffers from predominantly visual, intrusive thoughts, just got chills writing that. When I was in elementary school, I think 3rd or 4th grade, I got a new phone and was super happy about this. It was a small Samsung oval shape that you had to slide up to reveal the keyboard. I took the bus home after school and played some game on my phone when 2 older guys, teenagers to early 20s, started talking to me, saying how cool my phone was and if they could have a closer look at it. I very proudly handed them my phone, and after a couple of minutes, they gave it back to me, and I went off the bus because I arrived at my stop. My parents were divorced, and I spent the weekends at my dad's. I had my dad's contact saved with his number and an email address. Suddenly, my dad, sitting in front of his PC, called me over to look at something. It was an email sent to his account, directed at me, talking about how they met me in the bus and that I was so nice and fun, and if I would like to meet them again. My dad laughed and mocked me about how I have an admirer, but I clearly remember my heart sinking to my feet as I remembered those 2 guys I encountered some days prior. Some pedophiles sent an email to my dad's account trying to meet me again, and my dad mocked me for having admirers. I clearly remember feeling so vulnerable and hurt, and I'm still traumatized by this. I had a step-uncle married to my stepmom's sister who has since passed. I didn't know him too well, but he wasn't a bad guy. However, one evening when I was maybe 13, my parents were having a party. Nothing huge, a few family members having drinks. I had been sent to bed, but had gotten up to get a drink from the kitchen. Said uncle was stood in the kitchen in a kind of stupor, and he says, "Wouldn't you stab somebody if you had the chance?" I think I replied, "What?" He gives me a super intense look and just goes, "Aren't you curious to know what it would feel like, pushing that blade into somebody?" I honestly think I laughed and said, "Yeah, but I've never felt more uncomfortable in my life." That's the only awkward encounter I had with him, and though I hadn't seen him for years when he passed, by all accounts was a good man. That definitely creeped me out though. One morning I woke up, my 5-year-old son, to get ready for kindergarten. Still half asleep, he asked me, "Where's Banjo? When are we going to look for him?" This completely creeped me out. Banjo was the name of our family dog, a bull terrier that we had on the farm when I was still a pre-teenager. One day, this was 1970, there was a flash flood in our area, and my little brother was stuck in the middle of a raging river on a rock. Banjo jumped in the water, he loved swimming, to rescue my brother, but he got swept away by the powerful current, and we never saw him again. I also clearly remember seeing 2 cows being swept away by the water. My brother had to stay on that rock for a full 11 hours before the water was safe enough for a boat to cross to get him. My brother was distraught about our dog having been presumably killed by the flood. Only 2 years after that incident, my brother was killed while cycling on the rural road when a speeding vehicle passing a truck on the wrong side of the road hit him from behind. I've never told my son about Banjo. There's no way he could have known that name. My son has been acting in ways that reminds me of my deceased brother. They have the same favorite color. They like the same food. They both like to sing. I can't help but think that the soul of my brother migrated into my son somehow. I have a neighbor who lives on the same floor as me, and his apartment is right next to mine. He's like 70 plus and blind, and every now and then he enjoys walking down the hall while feeling the walls around him because he has no strength to actually go outside anymore. Last year in August, I was locking my apartment door, getting ready to leave and meet a friend, when I noticed him walking slowly down the hall towards me. I politely said hi to him as usual as I fumbled with my keys. He approached me slowly, leaned in and started fondling my butt. I took a step away in shock, but he came after me and said, "Let me kiss your..." See, I felt my blood freeze. I then said in disbelief, "What the hell? You should be ashamed." But he replied by repeating the exact same phrase. I pushed him away and left quickly. I still live here. He still takes strolls in the hallway. I've told a few friends, but not my landlord or any authority, because I'm sure they won't take me seriously, or say something like, "Don't mind him, he's old and senile, he doesn't know what he's saying." My friends were concerned though, and asked me if I was okay. I wasn't. Ruben was his name. My wife, girlfriend at the time, and I had to travel to San Antonio for my PRK/LASIK surgery. When we arrived in town, we found out our initial hotel plans fell through, and we had to find a last-minute motel to stay at. We get everything situated around noon and get our key for a second-floor room. We load back into our car and drive to the other side of the motel to park our car near our room and start unloading our luggage. Now, if you're not aware of San Antonio, Texas, or any large city, there are a lot of homeless and or drug users roaming around. As we were unloading our car with our 2 suitcases and a couple of backpacks, my wife and I noticed a disheveled man walking parallel to the motel. He turns towards us and starts approaching us. In our minds, we figured he was just going to ask for cash and go on his way. I mean, the majority of my encounters with homeless and or drug users are that, but we're still on guard because we don't know this area. After he approached us, he asked if we needed help unloading our stuff. He has a 40 ounce in one hand and another 40 ounce halfway out of his cargo pocket, and at this point, I can smell the alcohol coming off him. We politely tell him no, that we don't need help, as it's only a couple of things. He stumbles to put his opened 40 ounce on the brick ledge next to us and states he would like to help us, and it's the least he can do. He firmly takes my suitcase out of my hand and starts to introduce himself as Ruben. I obviously on guard here. I mean, the man has a suitcase in his hand, and I don't even know him. He starts walking to the stairs, continuing his life story. He seems pretty harmless, but still giving my wife and me those vibes. I explained to him that I don't have cash on hand and that I wouldn't be able to tip him for his generosity. Ruben says that it's fine, and again, this is the least he could do. At this point, he's following my wife and me on the outside balcony to our room. Again, my bells are ringing, and so are my wife's. I restate that I don't have cash. My wife hurries into the room, and I'm with Ruben with my stuff. He hands me my stuff, and I put it in the room right behind the door. I'm starting to close the door, my thigh pressed against it as well as my wife. As I'm thanking him for his help, he extends his hand out in the form of expecting a payment. I again tell him that we don't have the cash to tip him. In an instant, Ruben's facial expressions changed from an "I'm glad to help you" happy face to an "I will hurt you and your wife and won't think twice about it" soulless look. My hand is on my knife. I didn't have a CCL or /OCL at the time, and at this point, I'm pushing the door shut. But before I shut it, Ruben utters the phrase, "You better keep your windows and doors locked." I slammed and immediately locked the door and ensured the windows were in fact locked. We moved some of the furniture in front of the door and windows in a way to barricade them and kept them there for the remainder of our stay when we were in the room and finally notifying the front desk of him. Even returning to the room, we would look under the bed and in the bathroom for him in case he broke in. Each time we left the room for my medical appointments, we would always be on the lookout for Ruben, and even to the point of parking in different spots and take different ways to our room so we wouldn't bump into him again. This was 4 to 5 years ago, and my wife and I still get shivers down our spine by the way he just changed so suddenly and uttered those words to us. Hypothetically, if someone would share San Antonio news report of a man named Ruben killing someone since then, I wouldn't be surprised. Subway workers, tunnel rats, and explorers of Reddit. What's your scariest unexplained true story of the underground? There used to be an old abandoned school in a town by my house. It was heavily boarded up and super hard to get to. Well, a friend and I managed to get inside by climbing up the side of the school via a pipe fire escape combo and slipping through a window on the roof. We explored the basement, which was flooded. It was kinda creepy seeing stairs disappear into water. We had just left the gym when we heard footsteps coming from the doors on the other side of the gym. Scary, especially considering it sounded like it was one person, not another group of explorers like us, and blocking our exit back up to the roof. The only way out otherwise was behind us through boarded up doors. They sounded like someone who was walking around and stopping periodically. There was no light coming from that direction, and we couldn't fathom while someone would come up into a creepy place like this alone. We waited for the footsteps to stop, then snuck across the gym, peered down the hallways, saw no one, and continued toward the stairs, which would lead us back up to the roof. Halfway down the hall, we hear someone sprinting behind us, probably 50 meters away or so, down a typical high school hallway. Now, it is mostly dark in here, but there was a small amount of light coming in through cracks in the window boards. Still, we didn't see anything behind us as we quickly ran up the stairs. We didn't stop until we got back to the 4th floor. We listened for noise, nothing. Hopped out the window and climbed back down the pipe. Freshman year of high school, I noticed this large panel under an old staircase in the basement of a school building. For years, my buddies and I talked about opening it, but it was across the hall from the office of the lady in charge of misdemeanors and suspensions. Fast forward to the last day of senior year, after most everyone had left. My two buddies and I, in formal attire from the day's events, unscrewed the panel from the wall. Sure enough, there was a tunnel, about 5 feet below the floor. Luckily, there was a sturdy stool for us to climb down. There was a system of tunnels down there, but our exploration was limited since we were in good clothes and there was standing water some of the tunnels. The unexplained part is that while there were pipes where we went, there were tunnels without pipes that went out from the building's footprint and not toward any other building. These tunnels had inches deep, standing, nasty water, so we couldn't go in them in rented dress shoes, but we could make out that they connected to other tunnels which seemed to serve no purpose. I doubt there was anything sinister going on, but we thought it was pretty creepy at the time. Was playing in the woods and tripped over something solid. Found it was a cement circle and realized it was an underground door. The next day I come back with a crowbar to open, and like hell I'm going in unarmed. Pull it up, and it's a Cold War era personal bomb shelter that failed. There was a giant crack in the roof. The floor was covered in slime, but what was worse is the walls are covered in writings. This is the end, we must die, everyone is gone. Till I find the back wall and a giant red scrawl, get the fuck out of my home. That's it, fuck this, I'm fucking out. I sprint up the door and close it. I don't want to know what the hell that was. But I came back the next day, it's burned out. I didn't set a fire intentionally, and I didn't smell smoke leaving. My grandpa got lost in Mammoth Cave after he got back after World War II. Apparently, before he was drafted, it was not a national park, and the rules around exploring it were very loose. The property it was on was privately owned, and locals were known to trespass to explore the cave. Or, that's what my grandpa used to tell me. He and his friends may have been the only people trespassing. While my grandpa was serving in the Pacific Theater, the cave became a national park. After arriving home, my grandpa and his friends that survived the war went back to explore for old time's sake. They were wandering around with flashlights when they heard a tour group. Considering they weren't in there legally and had bypassed many federal trespassing signs, they cut the lights and slowly but surely tried to walk unnoticed back to the entrance. Unfortunately, they went deeper and spent 17 hours in there before getting out. He didn't have many stories because apparently you inch along in complete darkness without being able to see your hand in front of your face. But he said one of his friends kept saying, "We didn't survive that shit to die in here." Many years ago, I worked as a technical assistant at a coal mining company. This was basically doing the grunt work for those with degrees, taking samples of things, doing data entry, driving the surveyors around, etc., etc. One of my duties was to go into the underground mines and take coal, dirt, and air samples on a regular basis. Often, this would be a little away from other workers. At one place I'd hate going because every time it'd feel and sound like there was someone standing just behind me to my left and whispering in my ear, even when the nearest other person was 30 yards away or so. Probably just weird acoustics, but fuck, I hated those days. My buddy and me spent many years crawling through sewer pipes. One day, we were out in the woods, me and him and another friend. We were deep in the woods. We found some pipe sticking out of a hillside and agreed to explore it. Well, we crawled down this thing a good 600 feet or so on our hands and knees. At times it gets smaller and we're on our stomachs. Finally it comes to one of those big manhole rooms, and we get the impression we're under a house. Of course, we also know that in some places, manholes will exist in the middle of nowhere for future developments. Anyways, the room has 3 other super small pipes heading off in different directions, like slither on your stomach size. We choose one and make our friend Z go first. We go down about 300 feet, and he shouts back that there's something in the way. He thinks it's a dead animal, but since we're using weak headlamps, he can't tell. We coerce him to climb over it. Then comes me. He's freaking out, saying shit is all over his clothes, and he didn't know what it was. I climb over this dark lump of refuse. Feels like a body, but not human, not even animal, just alien. Smells bad, smells horrible. I slide over this nasty shit, almost puking. My buddy behind me comes next, same story. We keep going, asking ourselves why we even do this shit in the first place, exploration, etc., into the unknown, the forbidden. We crawl another few hundred feet. Z starts complaining about a horrible, god-awful stench ahead. We can't for the life of him get him to continue. He ends up throwing up. We start throwing the idea around of gas of some sort. He says with his headlamp, there's something big up ahead. Looks like an honest-to-God body. Human, maybe. We slide backwards, quickly, until we get to the manhole room. We crawl out quickly. We get into the daylight and investigate the shit stuck to our clothes from the thing we slid over. It's dark, bloody dark, refuse dark. Looks like fur. We agree that it was probably a trapped animal. Never go back ever again. I currently attend a state university full-time. By the description, you might be able to figure out which one. I'm currently a senior living in a private housing downtown, but sophomore year I lived in the university's only downtown quad. It was built in the early 1920s and definitely looked it compared to the uptown campus and housing quads. I was in the basement lounge area, grabbing my mail, when I noticed a nearby door that wasn't usually open and a nearby maintenance worker. I casually asked the guy what was down there. He said, "Don't know. We just store our materials on the stairs." My curiosity got the better of me, and I asked him if I could take a look to see what was all the way at the bottom of the flight of stairs. He said, "I don't see why not. Just don't get hurt or anything down there, and try to be back before my supervisor gets back in 15. This guy should definitely have not let me down there, because he clearly hadn't seen it. There was friable asbestos literally everywhere, particularly the decomposing ceiling tiles. I turned on my phone flashlight to find that it was some kind of sealed-off research area. The stairs led to a hallway which looks like it may have been hospital-like at one time, but it had since experienced some heavy water damage. There were approximately 7 rooms on either side, with one-way glass pane in each, with some kind of 90s intercom panel to the right. Inside each room were heavily rusted bed frames, a sink, and a toilet. All the way at the end of the hall were a series of file cabinets. I would have looked to see what they contained, but figured it would only be a cloud of black mold spores, so I decided against it. Nothing inherently creepy about the area, I suppose, but definitely. There's an old, half-torn-down school on the air base outside of my hometown. The supposedly haunted old grain silos about a quarter mile away get more attention, but the school is what me and my friends were obsessed with. We had gone in during the day and poked around, finding the typical bullshit graffiti teenagers make in places like that, like "fuck God" with the anarchy symbol and "all hail the Zodiac killer," stupid shit like that. We wanted to go in at night, but didn't want to break our necks doing it, which ended up being a smart choice, since there were holes in the floor that went all the way down to the basement, which seemed to have about just above ankle-deep standing water at the time. We didn't get really freaked out until later, when we went back at night, and as we're psyching ourselves up to go in, some kind of early 90s blue Ford and a gun rack pulls into the empty parking lot. Its lights cut right through the car and made it hard to see much, but it spooked the hell out of us. We got the hell out of there, but the truck followed us around the airbase for the better part of half an hour, turning on its high beams and tailgating us, and then turning their lights off completely and acting like they were tailing us. In spite of it only being the 2 cars on the road at that hour, plus the airbase being, abandoned. We're just glad we're still in the car and not inside when they got there. I used to wander around the old abandoned mines, cabins, and grounds of Montana, area people hadn't been in at least 3 decades. I knew every cabin too. I knew people who'd been there decades prior when there were still crazy old gold-panning loony types who'd never given up hope of the big find. I remember one story my father has with one of those people. My father and his brother were looking in this one area and a shot went over their heads. My father and uncle froze and said they were just hiking. The old man said they were trying to steal, and my father said who his grandfather was, who lived on the mountain since the early 60s. The old man then stopped, said to thank their mother for feeding him when he was starving one winter, but that he wasn't taking visitors that day and to get lost. About a decade ago, my father and I found the dilapidated cabin that man was in by chance wandering randomly through the woods. It was really hard to find, and we had just barely come across it. Everything that old man had was still there. The roof was partially caved in, pots and pans were still in the stove like he had died in there or nearby. There was no body though, just everything was there, covered in decades of normal decay, frozen in time, tools and all. It was a museum 100 years in the past, but only my father and I knew how to visit it. The old man must have died over 30 years ago at least, since he was so old when my father saw him. That cabin was bulldozed to build millionaire cabins 8 or so years ago, along with dozens of other secret museums of the gold rush past. I used to know every secret path of that woods for miles in every direction to every secret cabin, game trail, and serene natural rest stop. It's all now empty cul-de-sacs with no cabins because the money stream ran dry. I think that is the scariest and saddest part, frankly. I was once alone at Moorgate Station in London after staying for a few after-work drinks with my buddy who also works in Central. It was around 10 p.m, so I left the pub and walked to the station and found I'd missed the previous train by about 5 minutes. Moorgate Station is an underground station, but the overground trains depart and terminate there. The train that I needed to catch always departs from one of 2 platforms that are in their individual tunnels adjacent to one another but accessible by foot as they are connected by paths that connect the platforms every 15 feet or so. I was sat on the bench right at the end near where the front of the train would be departing. As I sat there, I saw some movement in the corner of my eye, so I turned and started to see just a regular guy dressed in dark clothing coming through from the other platform passage about 10 meters from me and thought nothing of it. He went by the track, stared down, backed away, and ran back through the passage to the other platform. I thought to myself, that was weird, and quickly got up to follow him and find out why he was running / if he was okay. I was no more than 5 seconds behind him, and the exit or entry to the platform is right by the other end, which was a good 150 meters or so away. As I go through the passage to the other platform, I look to see no one there. I then went back to the other platform, and again, I was the only one there, apart from a woman who just reached the bottom of the escalator to the platform entrance right down the other end. It was something I couldn't explain, and I was sure I couldn't recall any footsteps that made it even weirder. London is an old place and has a lot of history, so not sure if there was an event that could give reasoning to what I experienced, but it's a memory that will always stick with me. Well, not unexplained, as the explanation is I'm an idiot, but definitely scary. Houston is crisscrossed with bayous because it's a swamp that needs to be drained a lot. There are these gigantic tunnels that lead to the bayous and collect water from the storm drains. When we were kids, these were great to explore. We'd make maps about how to get from one area to another using these tunnels. Well, we set aside one Saturday to try to make all the way to a mall a couple miles away from the starting point. Our hand-drawn map was about halfway done. We got lost, and then, as it wont to do in Houston in the summer, it started pouring down rain. This happened before, but we were usually close to an exit. Not this time. It kept raining. The water got high enough that the current knocked us over. Eventually, we got spit out into the bayou from a tunnel we had never even explored. After finally getting out of the bayou and getting back to safety, we realized we were almost a mile from where we started. I grew up in Frederick, Maryland. Back in the mid-90s to early 2000s when I was a teenager, the city still had a very Rust Belt vibe. Before its fairly recent revival into a hipster-infested douche mecca, it had a fairly large blue-collar presence, particularly along the city's open-air drainage canal, which, back when I was growing up, was flanked on both sides by tons of abandoned and or condemned buildings, both residential and industrial. Now it's all sushi fusion joints, hilariously overpriced condos, and vintage thrift shops like every other city on the East Coast. Anyway, back then, we would roam around the city and break into abandoned buildings for fun. Sometimes we'd vandalize the place, but usually we were just exploring and using them as a hangout spot where we could drink and smoke weed without having to worry about cops. There were a bunch of creepy moments, particularly when you'd break into a condemned house only to discover that one or more homeless people had set up in there. My city kind of had a reputation for having a lot of severely mentally ill homeless people back then, paranoid schizophrenics and such, a bunch of whom I knew by name back then. One memory that stands out though was an abandoned house we broke into, which had clearly been vacant for many, many years, with visible black mold growing on the walls. It was weird, because it had clearly been occupied by a family previously, because all of their stuff was still there, like the rapture happened and they just disappeared. Beds, dressers with clothes, family photos on the walls, all of that. We didn't dare open the fridge. It really seemed like, for some reason, the family drove away one day and just never returned. It was super creepy walking through their home with flashlights and just getting this rotted glimpse into their lives before whatever happened. Although it's technically not urban exploring, as a former electrician, I think I can still share one moment from a job I had to do about 13 years ago. Me and my job partner were called out to a larger restoration job that was being done to an older house from the early 1900s. The house was, until this point, a family-owned house which had two owners since it was built, and the last owner was an old lady who had passed away there whilst being the last person in her family line. Sad story on its own, and nobody could take over the house. So, the house got auctioned to a younger couple that bought it for an insane amount of money due to how large the house was, but it was now time to get the old house up to modern standards, which included a completely new installation from scratch, as the old cables around the house were the type of cables that were insulated with black cotton and fastened with handcrafted wooden clamps. While working on the first floor was quite easy, as the entire installation process was made to fit inside the new wall frames that the carpenters were setting up. We eventually had to move onto the second floor and preparing for setting up a new intake from the attic, which would then pass down to the new main fuse box on the second floor. We opened the hatch to the attic, and while using the flashlight to look up there, we could surely see that the attic was very cramped, so the smallest of us would have to go up there to fix everything to get the intake cable settled while removing the old one. As you might guess, I was the smallest of us and had to do that shitty job of going up where nobody probably had been for many, many years. So I decided to grab a lunch break and mentally prepare myself for what I expected to become a pretty shit job. After eating, I grabbed my flashlight and tool belt and started climbing up the stairs. And while climbing upwards, I noticed that the smell that we thought was pretty much old people smell after they die was getting increasingly stronger. But I had to continue, so I go to the top and crawled myself onto something stable when I got up, while noticing that the smell up there was pretty damn bad. So I grabbed my flashlight to look around and get somewhat oriented about where to crawl. Looking forward, it seemed like a pretty straightforward route towards the intake point that I could see in the distance. But out of curiosity, I wondered if there was anything up there, so I looked to my right, only to light up 5 carcasses of what once looked the old lady's cats that probably had died. One of them were more or less intact, whilst being visibly partly eaten by various insects or whatever eats such stuff, while 2 of them were more or less just rotten, dried skin and bones. At that moment, I absolutely regretted my decision to eat lunch, as the sight of this, along with the realization about what I had smelled all along was these dead cats, and immediately threw up on the spot before very swiftly noping the fuck out of there. After some talk back and forth, we came to the possibility that the old lady had been throwing her cats up there when they died, one by one, but we'll never know for sure since the lady had died. The new owners had no idea about this when buying the house, but our company ended up denying to continue the work until the attic had been cleaned appropriately. This apparently took them about 1 month to complete. I guess there are not many companies who want to deal with that kind of nasty stuff, but my partner at work ended up finishing the work on the attic afterwards, as he felt kind of bad for me. In the end, I decided to not continue being an electrician anymore, as this was not the work I really enjoyed doing, especially not after this event. So I've done a lot of things like this, and there is usually an explanation for anything that seems untoward. Disused mental hospitals, train tunnels, sewers, abandoned stations, utility tunnels, military installations, the lot. It's usually just your mind if you think something is weird. One story that springs to mind was being in a storm drain in London. The storm drains are generally dry, but there might be water elsewhere. The tunnels can stretch for miles at a time. We would always listen out for moving water and any change in air pressure or temperature, just to know whether there was going to be any change in water level or something dumped into the tunnel further up the line. I was in this sewer, and there was a massive gust of wind. No idea what caused it, but the chap I was with looked at me and with bold just said, "We're leaving right now." We stomped up the tunnel and made our way out into dry night. Something in that change of air pressure and temperature told us something, and I'm not sure what it was, but we both knew that leaving there and then was the right thing to do. I'm not sure I qualify, since the explanation seems rather straightforward to me. Another group of explorers, still. I have a pretty good story. I attended the University of Huddersfield, and one of the accommodation facilities for students is called Stroth's Hall. Stroth's Hall was previously a psychiatric hospital and asylum. Most of the buildings were demolished. I believe 2 are currently in use to house students, and then off-site there's this main building and the mortuary. The main buildings were off limits, and I believed security guards were in place, but when you have several hundred drunk students living nearby, you're basically just grabbing sand. I went with a group of people, and we intended to have some kind of DIY seance. Darren Brown had done his not long before, so we toddled off with tarot cards and a Ouija board. It was all pretty funny, to be honest. None of us really took it seriously, and having seen the Darren Brown seance, I was really skeptical. Then the torch died, and we heard several loud knocks. We fucked off sharpish, but again, it likely was somebody fucking with us after hearing the panic caused by the torch going out. Might have even been the security guards. I wouldn't blame them. What is a creepy, unexplained childhood experience that you had? My brother and I were watching TV one time late at night in the mid-90s. Suddenly, the audio to the show we were watching cut out. We changed to various channels, and only the show we had been watching had lost audio. We flipped back to see if the audio had returned, and it was literally the audio of people having a phone call. Not scripted, not associated with the show. Like a live phone call. Like the way you can sometimes hear other people's chatter on a walkie-talkie. It was a man and a woman talking, and they were trying to find their friend Howard. Just this panic back and forth dialogue about where he could be. It was clear Howard wasn't their child because they kept referring to him as that motherfucker. That almost sounded like they wanted to harm him. I even wrote down some of the things they had said and Google searched them many years later to see if the lines were from a script or a show or something. Nope, not a result. The Howard conversation continued for about 5 minutes, and my brother and I listened to the whole thing. Then the conversation ended. Click. The audio for the channel didn't return until morning. Well, not that it cannot be explained, but it was creepy. I woke one night to see a face looking in my bedroom window. We lived on the lower ground, so the likelihood of someone actually doing that was high. It was super creepy because the person had their head twisted like the way a dog cocks their head to listen, and he had his hands pressed against the glass, just staring at me wide-eyed. It was the most terrifying thing to me. The scariest thing was it took me for a few minutes to actually notice him. I'd been awake looking around the room for a while. I hid under the covers and eventually nodded off. When I was young, probably around 6 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure just standing at the corner of my bed. Rather than resembling a person, it looked exactly like the silhouette of one, just pitch black, which was odd considering I had a nightlight in my room. Never had experienced anything like that since, and honestly questioned whether or not it was simply a dream. When I was a kid, 8 or 9, I used to have this tradition during the summer. I would sneak downstairs and eat a fudgesicle ice cream from our kitchen. We lived in a huge 300-year-old farmhouse that looked like the Amityville Horror, so around midnight or so, I started the long descent down the stairs into a darkened, completely quiet house. About halfway down from a first-floor room, which should have been empty, I hear a chair scraping as it was moved about 10 feet across the room. I stood completely frozen, gripping the banister. After an undetermined time in total darkness, paralyzed with terror, I fled back to my bedroom, and so ended my glorious tradition forever. When I was in middle school, my mom began describing to me these strange fits I would have while I was sleeping at night. She asked me why I was kicking and screaming and if I had been having nightmares, and I told her I couldn't remember because, well, I really couldn't. We had just moved into a double house and we lived on the lower level, but I would occasionally have dreams of being on the balcony on the upper level and falling down into the grass in the backyard. The dreams were not necessarily scary, just weird. Eventually, I began to have dreams about getting up and walking around the house, turning on lights, looking in the fridge, etc., and then going back to my bed. One of these dreams entailed standing in front of the television and flipping the channels over and over, never really stopping on one channel to see what was on, then turning the TV off and going back to bed. My mom began questioning me again when she kept finding random lights on in the morning or the TV remote in the middle of the floor. At one point, she yelled at me for turning on every light in the house, and it sort of clicked for me because I had a dream that I had gotten up and turned on all the lights. I tried to explain it to her, but she just wrote me off as one would do to a middle schooler. While we lived there, none of it really connected for me because I was young and the incidents would happen weeks apart. I did find the occurrences strange, but I found a lot of things strange at the time, and I've always felt that I come to understand things ass backwards. It wasn't until I was a little older and my mom brought it up again that I was able to connect the dots. I had forgotten all about those strange dreams because when we moved out of that house, we moved around within the same city a lot because my mom often had issues with landlords. The dreams stopped and I never sleepwalked again. Now that I'm older, I often wonder what the hell was going on. The dreams were so vivid and the lights being on and things being moved all seemed like clues that I was indeed sleepwalking, but why only that house? And why did I have memories of it as if my eyes were open but my brain was barely functioning? I think about what I must have looked like in that state. If anybody has ever seen me, I'd have been like a zombie, eyes halfway open, just turning lights on and off and flipping TV channels. The whole thing is still a big mystery to me. I had an invisible friend when I was 4 or 5-ish. Her name was Jenny, and she was my older sister. I thought it was pretty cool she had long brown hair because mine was short and blonde. One day I mentioned her to my mom, who freaked out and told me never to talk about Jenny ever again. At the time, I had no idea why she reacted that way. Jenny faded away over time, as invisible friends do. I still vividly remember her, but she wasn't around anymore. One day my mom was slightly drunk, and we had one of our rare non-screaming conversations. Apparently before I was born, she had lost a nearly full-term pregnancy, a girl who would have been named Jennifer. Obviously, I could have been told this at some point when I was super young, but she was just so vivid that it's hard to believe I don't remember being told about her until years after I stopped seeing her. This isn't creepy, but maybe unexplained. So I moved from China to the US when I was around 6 years old, and I'd lived with my grandparents up until then. I remember struggling with the transition and missing my grandparents a lot. One day I was taking a nap and I had a dream. I was sitting in my grandma's lap, and she was slowly rocking me and telling me this is just a dream, and that we should just enjoy it while it lasted. She and I were sitting across a road, and I remember knowing that right across the road was my sleeping body. I told her I didn't want to go back, and that she could come back with me. We just needed to cross the road together. She said, "Okay, I'll walk you across." But as we almost reached the other side of the road, she let go of my hand and said, "You'll wake up soon," and I immediately woke up. My dad was there when I woke up, and he asked me if I knew what dream English meant. As I barely knew English at the time, I had no idea, and he said I was muttering, "This is a dream," in English in my sleep. He told me what it meant in Chinese and said something about subconsciously learning English words. I think because the dream and learning about the word dream happened together, I was just never able to forget it. I still can vividly remember that dream, and it was almost 20 years ago. I remember very vividly as a kid looking around the house for my mom once, and I looked in her room, like thoroughly looked, not just a glance, and I absolutely did not see her. I kept looking, and a few minutes later glanced in her room again and saw her. I asked where she was, and she said she had been there the whole time. Weird thing is, that's not the only time that happened. Another instance I remember clearly, the living room was extremely small. All that was in there was a side table, coffee table, couch, and chair, and it was still hard to navigate due to size. I say this to emphasize how hard it'd be to not see someone in there. Anyways, I took a nap on the chair by the couch and woke up to my mom screaming and sobbing. She'd been looking for and screaming my name and never once saw me. She swears up and down I was just gone. Primary school, we had this book. We all read it. It was scaring, to be honest. I have no idea why the hell it was a kid's book. Not even my parents know that I had to read it for school because I hid it from them. I'll give a synopsis of what I remember. This kid wakes up one night and sees that a giant wasp has somehow gotten in his room. They, can't remember the gender they were, so I'm going to use they, them, are at first scared, understandably, but it seems friendly. It even fed them food. The main character forms a strong bond with the insect. However, strange things start to happen to them. The book thankfully didn't go too in-depth, but it said the main always felt full. The book ends with the main character lying down with their stomach being in immense pain and feeling like it's about to explode. The character realizes that the wasp didn't care about them. It cared about the eggs it planted inside them, the ones that have hatched. It describes the insects inside them were clawing their way out, scratching at their stomach. The character presumably dies after. And keep in mind, this somehow made its way to the kids section of our school book reading program. I have no idea how the heck it ended up there. When I was very little, I would wake up and see a dog at the end of the bed by my feet looking at me. I use the term dog very loosely because it really looked like some giant wolf with ribs protruding and shaggy hair, plus the face looked more like a combination of canine and shaman mask. It's super hard to describe other than it was freakish, and to this day I can still see it. I would inevitably yell at the top of my lungs, and as soon as someone would walk in or wake up in the room, it would vanish. It happened so much that my family started dragging me to all kinds of doctors and even spiritual leaders. I also apparently had trouble with sleepwalking. I would wake up in the middle of the night, put on my little robe and slippers, walk to the kitchen, turn the lights on, and sit at the table. So long story short, I really think I just had a bunch of sleep or neurological problems when I was little that can all probably account for the weird experiences. As an adult, I have had zero problems with sleepwalking or anything else. I had just rearranged and organized my room when I was 12ish. My grandma gave me all these porcelain dolls, which I hated, but I loved my grandma and saw how happy it made her to give them to me, so I'd always act like I liked them. I put them all in this closet that ran the length of my and my sister's room, basically one big long room with each having a closet that ran the length of both rooms on opposite sides. Old 1800s log cabin attic. When I organized my room, because they always creep me out to be honest, I moved my bed from sticking out to the middle of the room to against the wall, which made a big open area in the middle. The moon would shine in my window because it faced west, so I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes all groggy, and there, facing the window, so standing right side of me, was one of my porcelain dolls that had dark brown curls and a blue velvet dress on. I was confused because I knew I put this doll in that closet. Its door was shut. I sat up and just looked at it, and when I did, I swear to God, this porcelain doll turned its fucking head towards me. It didn't even get its head all the way toward me before I noped right under the covers and stayed there hyperventilating. I eventually uncovered my head and it wasn't there anymore. I don't know WTF happened, but my dad rented a dump truck for construction and I took all those dolls and put them in there the next day. I fucking hate dolls. My brother and I were home alone in the early 2000s while our parents were at work. We were both sitting in the living room watching TV when a pillow that had been sitting on my bed in the back of the house came skidding across the hardwood floor and landed in front of the TV. My brother begged me to admit I had done it, and to make him feel better, I told him it was a prank. It was not me though, and our parents came back home like 3 hours later. When I was about 10, I had a sleepover at a friend's house in the countryside near Berlin. At about 2 a.m., my friend's parents received a phone call from an urgent-sounding woman with a heavy Russian accent, asking to speak to my first name, which isn't that unusual, but not ridiculously common either. She proceeded to say that she was at the airport and she had to leave right now, but she had the thing in her bag for me and needed to give it to me before she left. Wrong number is the only explanation other than time traveler I've ever come up with for this story, which still keeps me up at night. But even then, it would still be creepy. The odds of her calling the wrong number and asking for my name on the one night someone with that name was staying over at that house. Also noteworthy, she answered the phone in English, which is very unusual for that time and location. I would frequently wake up to the sound of footsteps walking up and down the stairs, across the landing and around my bed. A lot of the time when I was downstairs alone at night, I would see solid black silhouettes of people standing perfectly still, yet moving slightly, so I would know they were there. One time I was playing on my PlayStation in the dining room and I heard some very weird noises coming from above me in my bedroom. The sound was like a large animal with claws scratching at the floor. No one was upstairs. I was about 5. We had hatched chicks in an incubator and they had just started to live in a large box under lights to keep them warm in my garage. I awakened from a dream in the middle of the night, jumped up in horror. I had dreamt that all of the chicks were dead and blood and feathers were everywhere. I started walking down the stairs to the first floor to check on them in the garage, but stopped myself. I could not go down the stairs. I was so upset and knew that I could not help them because they were already dead. I couldn't face it. I went back to bed pretending that I never had this dream. In the morning, I ran downstairs and asked my dad if he had been out to the garage yet. He said to me, "I know this will upset you. I don't know what happened to the chicks, but everyone is gone." I still could not believe it and forced myself to go into the garage and look into the large, empty box. When I was like 7, I always used flashlights to go to the bathroom at like midnight. Anyways, I finished using the bathroom and I opened the door, shined the flashlight into the kitchen. My room is in a hallway that is able to, through the kitchen, entirely to the garage door that has a little hallway in front of it. So I shine the flashlight and I see something looking at me, but quickly retreat back in the corner. I ran to my room and closed the door. TL, DR, some shit looking at me in the dark. I ran. Okay, this one crazy, but I think there was a glitch in reality, or maybe I was a stupid kid, I don't know. There was this one tree in the middle of the elementary school I went to where sadly a lot of kids carved little dumb things like me, ex, crush, and such. I remember vividly that it mostly grew red leaves and gave off a weird vibe. I'm not sure how to explain the vibe, I just felt a bit put off by it. But anyway, every other week, I swear it would change position to the outside of the school. Same red leaves, same carving, same vibe. I was about 6, so I thought I was dreaming it up, or that it's just how some things are. I was very imaginative, and I guess I didn't have a full grip on reality, so I dismissed that for a while. Until a former classmate brought it up about a year ago. I'm 21 now, by the way. We reconnected through social media, and she explained how she would cry at her mom that the tree moved in and out of the school every time she saw it. Her mom didn't believe her at the time, but chimed into one of our calls when she heard her daughter tell the story over the phone. The mom mentioned having kind of seen that once when she went to pick her up from school and fully expected the tree to be outside the school, only to instead bump into a green-leaved tree in its place, and the red, creepy one across the school gate in the middle of the courtyard. She said she had never seen that before or even believed my classmates until that day, and even then, she brushed it off because it's weird and kinda dumb. I don't know what to think of it, it's just weird and not super like life-changing, so it's an oddity from my childhood, I guess. I was 13, babysitting my mother's best friend's granddaughter, 3 years old, at a farmhouse on the outskirts of Gunada. I was sleeping on the couch at around 3 a.m. and I woke up to a woman with a baby in her arms and a toddler clinging to her skirt. She and the baby were so badly burnt, but not the toddler. I asked her who she was. You know, the dumb shit a preteen just woken up asks, I suppose. Anyways, I really thought I was dreaming, cause she tells me her life on the new homestead, but she was cooking a meal on an open fire in the lean-to when the flue collapsed and she and the baby were burnt and died, but the toddler was scarred and crawled into the far corner, but the smoke got her. I really thought I was dreaming, cause as she finished her story, she looks normal, no burns. So when I finally got home, I told my mother about this super vivid dream. I even named the woman Martha. Instead of reacting with a slap, like she normally would, my mother told me it was just a dream and made me a cup of sweet tea. She even hugged me, but she very clearly told me not to tell anyone else, and I never did. 10 years later, for absolutely no reason, my mother tells me that in the late 1800s, there was a new homestead on the same place as the home I babysat her friend's granddaughter, and there was a fire in the original kitchen that killed Martha and her 2 children. I thought she was joking, but she tells me it's true, as her friend was the great-granddaughter of Martha from the son who was in the fields working with Martha's husband. Yeah, sort of stunned me, but I didn't pursue the conversation. I was too damned uncomfortable with my mother and the whole situation. What was a moment in your life that felt like a horror movie scene? Driving home from work at 23, listening to my favorite song. I pull up to a red light and see this guy on a motorcycle coming up next to me in the other lane. I roll down my window to compliment his bike when he stops. He doesn't, and runs the red light. He hits a car going at least 55 miles per hour. His motorcycle shatters apart. He goes flying, hits the hood of another car, and lands on the ground and rolls into the curb, no helmet. The car he hit with his motorcycle was totaled. I had to step over his body to talk to the police. He was still alive when they got there. I regret not holding his hand. It was just a normal day, and all of a sudden, it felt like the rug was pulled out from out beneath me. He was only 18. I was doing a wilderness survival class in Boy Scouts, and when we slept in our shelters overnight, I couldn't really sleep. When I woke up the next morning, everyone and the teacher were nowhere to be found. Better yet, I forgot where the exit to the pathway was, so I was stuck in an empty glade, surrounded by trees, and no way to get out. How exciting. When I was about 13, I had to stay home alone every day after school while my parents worked. One day, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer, obviously, because I was just a kid, and whoever it was started slowly trying to turn the locked doorknob. I called my mom after they left, and while I was on the phone with her, the back door started getting kicked down. As I was frantically trying to tell her I needed help, the phone call dropped, and I just had to run. It was a dark and quiet morning when I came to volunteer at the library. Usually no one came around that time. I signed in and went off to my newly assigned section. They were so dusty and messy, no one's probably been this deep into the library in a long time. I put on my music and do my work until suddenly I hear something. There's a man an aisle down who's looking at me. Tall, long, disheveled hair, dark, beady eyes. How long has he been standing there? I started the shift maybe 10 minutes ago. I've never felt such a feeling before, but I got the sense that he had killed someone before. I continued with my work and occasionally glance at the man who appears to be getting closer each time I look back at him. He continues staring at me. I'm so deep into the library, I don't think the security guard would hear me if I screamed. I'm completely on my own. I finish my work and decide to quickly run around the corners for somewhere safe. I zigzag around the shelves as much as possible. The best place I can find to hide is the bathroom. I lock it up. I wait for the time most patrons come into the library. The man appears to be gone. I spend the rest of the shift at the library on edge. My dad came home high off his ass, not unusual, and when I, 16 female at the time, wouldn't let him in my little brother's room to say goodnight, we got into it, also not unusual. He was trying to force his way past me, and he's at least 2 times my size on a good day. So I just tried to divert his attention to steer him away from my brothers. It wasn't hard to get him angry about something else, and he carried me more than dragged me outside. I was trying to get away, but just got slammed into the wall a few times for my trouble. In our neighborhood, nobody's going to call the police on you, so he wasn't worried about taking it outside to avoid a little extra property damage. He held me down with his knees on my elbows and started hitting me. I don't remember what he was yelling about, and I don't really care. I was kicking as much as I could and got in a couple of good shots to his groin, but he just put more of his weight on me. My older brother, 18 at the time, got home from work maybe a few minutes in. He usually got back just before my father did, and the two of us were almost always able to de-escalate him without too much trouble. And I remember him coming down the street at a dead run and basically just barreling into my dad to tackle him off me. My brother's a pretty wiry guy, but he has some muscle on him and is a much better match for our father. My dad pulled his gun, and I panicked and tried to take him down from behind, broke a bottle over his head. We were both trying to wrestle him down, and he got a couple shots off. Caught my brother off guard enough to get the upper hand. I stomped on his forearm hard enough to get the gun out of play. I don't remember who was hurt and how at that point. I can place things looking back, but all I remember is a hell ton of adrenaline. I'm not even sure I was really scared. I know some of our neighbors were out on their porches watching. That's how people tend to react to this sort of thing here. Between my brother and I, we got our dad out cold after a couple good hits on his head on the asphalt, but we got at least as good as we gave. This is where things start getting really hazy, and I'm not quite sure how conscious I was or how much I don't remember. My brother would be next to me, and I'd blink, and he'd be gone, and I couldn't really hear anything except myself breathing, like I was underwater or something. In the years since, my brother's filled me in somewhat on the details, so as far as I can piece things together, this is what happened. My brother checked to make sure our dad was really unconscious but not dead, and that I was vaguely coherent, and then he ran inside, told our little brothers to hide and not leave their room no matter what. When he came back outside, he said he knew he had to call the cops. This was the worst fight the three of us had ever gotten into, and the first time my brother and I couldn't just stitch each other up and be okay. I was and am still a minor, and he knew CPS would get involved if the police knew my father had hurt me. My brother and I have always worked hard to avoid CPS intervention and the high risk of being separated from our little brothers and each other. My brother got me up, slid me into the driver's side of my dad's car, and told me to step on the gas and keep going until I crashed. I don't remember this, but apparently the message got through. I think I hit someone else's car pretty hard as they came down the street in another direction. My brother called 911, reported the car accident, and that he and my dad had gotten into a bad physical fight. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. I had lacerations over my upper body from going halfway through the windshield, 5 broken ribs, and others cracked or bruised, a fractured sternum, quite a bit of internal bleeding from blunt abdominal trauma, injured spleen, and right hemothorax shattered cheekbone, and severe concussion, skull fracture, and cerebral contusion. I nearly died, and from the fact that my brother still won't tell me his own injuries, I assume he was about as close. They wouldn't let me see my brother or father, and I thought they were dead. I learned later that they'd both been arrested. Both were eventually convicted and sentenced. That night that we were fighting, that was the last time I touched my brother. I wish I'd hugged him. I visited a friend in a psych hospital, and I was advocating for something she needed. I got into the elevator, and a nurse stuck her head in and whispered, "Don't stop asking questions." And then the doors shut, and I never saw her again. For the record, I've been to plenty of psych hospitals with other friends, and this is the only one that was remotely a horror movie. The rest were perfectly normal hospitals. Also, this one is closed. So please don't not get medical care you need because I went to a creepy hospital 10 years ago. One time, we wanted to go out to eat, so we picked a little diner that we'd never been to before. There was one car out in the lot. We didn't really think much of it, so we went on in. When we entered, there was a key in the door. Nobody was in the building. All the lights were on and the fans were going. Even pies were in the display case to be sold. It was so creepy. We called out, but nobody was there. We quickly left. That happened probably in either 2008 or 2009, and to this day, I still want to know what happened there and why it was like that. The town where I went to college had a scarecrow building contest a few years ago and had them all lined up along the main road. There were some traditional looking ones, some scary looking ones, and some with themed outfits like football players or rock stars. One day, I was walking down the main road to get something from the gas station. There was almost no traffic and hardly anyone else outside. Suddenly, this really thick fog rolled in, much thicker than what they normally get in this town, so there I was, walking down a street with no one else around. It's quiet, and there are weird-looking scarecrows every 10 feet behind and in front of me. It was like something out of a Stephen King movie. When I was a kid, I spent a few years living on a property with my grandparents and great-grandparents. It was way up in the backcountry down a dirt road, one of a few old properties nestled in the national park. There was a real sort of deliverance vibe to the place. We were fairly isolated, but we often had issues with feral dogs. Pig hunters would illegally hunt in the national park, and if their dogs got wounded, they'd just turn them loose in the park. The surviving dogs would form into feral packs, and they'd attack livestock. My grandpa's neighbor was a bit of a nutter. He used to sit at his fence and take pot shots at strange cars that came too close to his gate. Aside from that, he was a really sweet old guy, and he was always nice to me. I used to ride my bike to the school bus stop, and on the way home, I'd always stop for a chat. I don't think I ever saw him without his old Lee Enfield rifle in his hand. Anyway, I was 12, and I'd picked up a part-time job at the bakery cafe in town, just a few hours a week after school, but it meant that in winter, I was sometimes riding home after it got dark and foggy. I was riding my bike home in the dark, came around the corner, and saw something hanging in the trees. Lots of somethings lining the road. Old mate next door had spent a few weeks shooting every pig dog he could find, and then he'd hung the corpses in the trees along the road outside his property. It was scary as fuck. TLDR. My grandparents' neighbor hung dog carcasses in the trees outside his property, and I found them in the dark. My dad just got home from work at the truck stop that I live across the street from. I got off at 3. My dad worked there as the cashier from 10 to 6 a.m. This was his second job. Around 3:45, my mom called me into her room to look out the window to see what the flashing lights were about. Cops regularly stopped people there, so I didn't think much of it. I tried calling my dad to see what was going on this time. No answer. I looked back out the front door towards the station and saw cops putting up caution tape. That never happened for any stops there before. I told my mom I was leaving and got in my car to drive over. I parked to the side and ran around to the back door, which was locked. Ran around to the front to all the people and cops standing outside the tape. My dad was not one of these people. I asked what happened, and they told me there had been a robbery and the cashier had been shot. I told them the cashier was my dad. I wasn't allowed to go in because it was still a crime scene. The police officer told me he was combative when they got there, saying that he was fine and could get his wallet for ID by himself. When they rolled him out on the stretcher, I don't remember him talking. I think they may have sedated him, or he was just unconscious. The EMTs asked which hospital we preferred, and they left with him. I called my mom and told her to get dressed, that my dad had been shot, and we were going to the hospital. We were at the hospital for the next day or so. The doctors attempted several surgeries to decrease the swelling in his brain from the gunshot. It wasn't working. His eyes were swollen shut and purple from the pressure. Eventually, we were told that he likely would not have any brain function from all of the damage and was taken off life support. Hey, my mom and I just bought a new house 28 days before this. We had been through so much with the move and my mom's health problems. We were basically homeless for a few weeks during the move. We were all so happy to be in the new home instead of our old home that had been falling apart for years. That didn't last very long. Sorry if this isn't your kind of horror story, but it's my horror story. My 18th birthday was a horror movie. As an explanation, my biological father sexually assaulted me when I was 6 or 7. He was arrested and moved with my older brother and my mother. During court, he walked in with a Bible. He was told that he could not contact me or my brother at any time until my brother or I turned 18. He received some amount of jail time, and I never heard from him until my brother's 18th birthday. My brother had received a friend request on Facebook from our bio dad because he was out of jail and wanted a second chance. My brother blocked him, and I dreaded the thought of my bio dad contacting me on my 18th birthday. On my birthday, I sat in front of my phone, waiting for a phone call, friend request, anything that I didn't recognize as a friend's number or his name on a friend request. 12 hours went by and nothing. I've never felt so much relief in my entire life. It's now 2021 and I haven't gotten a single call or friend request. My best friend and I went jet skiing one time with a girl we barely knew. I was uncomfortable with the whole situation. I was putting my life in the hands of a complete stranger, and I had a weird feeling about this person from the day I met her. Something just seemed off. My best friend, who is a very trusting person, insisted that we go, so we get to know this girl better. Being a good friend, I didn't want her going by herself. We skied out to an island so that we could go wave jumping on the open water. I went out wave jumping with this girl for about 15 minutes. The waves were incredibly rough, and I began to feel unsafe. After a close call with a large wave, I suggested we go back. Instead of leaving when we got back to the island, the girl proceeds to take my best friend out on the waves. They didn't come back. I sat on that island for 3 hours in turmoil until I was picked up by the police. The first 15 minutes after the girls left, I was okay. By 30 minutes, I was worried, and by 45 minutes, I was panicking. The only phone in the waterproof case was the girl's, and I didn't know her passcode. The police ended up calling me on her phone, and my heart sank to my stomach. The ski had tipped, and they had treaded water for an hour, then proceeded to almost drown in a rip. The worst thing about the ordeal was that the girl knew how unsafe the conditions were and had been warned by multiple people not to go out on the water that day. I still get furious thinking about how I almost lost my best friend, sitting helplessly on that island with no clue as to what happened. No phone access and no sign of rescue was awful. My life felt like a horror movie during those hours. TLDR. My best friend nearly died while I was stranded on an island. I was hanging out alone at home, listening to music in the living room. The house was a single-level ranch and I was 20 at the time. My sister came home and noticed someone make a popping their head up, looking in the large living room window. She was a bit drunk, so I thought she was imagining it. Nevertheless, we decided to close or lock all the windows and sleep in the same bedroom. I went to the back bedroom at the other end of the house to lock the window and found it open, with the screen removed from the tracks, suggesting someone tried to get in from the outside. I freaked out. Given music I was listening to was loud, I would not have heard someone enter and approach until they were upon me. I guess they heard my sister come home, came around front to look in the window, and then took off. It creeps me out to know this person might have watched me from the front window without my noticing and then proceeded to the back window to break in. I always wonder what would have happened if my sister didn't come home when she did. I don't think robbery was intent if it was clear I was in the house.